"Pretend to be my wife," he whispered. "Just for tonight, please." Elena Cross had never heard a powerful man say, "please," before. It stopped her cold. One moment, she was nobody, a seamstress, at the edge of a room full of people who didn't know she existed. The next, Caleb Hartwell's mouth was at her ear, his hand closing around hers in the dark, and 100 guests were already turning to look. She had 1 second to decide. 1 second before the lie became public and permanent and impossible to take back. She lifted her chin. She took his arm. And just like that, without a ring, without a ceremony, without ever saying yes, Elena Cross became Mrs. Caleb Hartwell, and nothing that followed would ever be simple again. If this story already has its hand around your heart, subscribe to our channel, stay with us until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Elena Cross had taken worse jobs than this one. She told herself that on the wagon ride out from Cheyenne, watching the open Wyoming land roll past in long amber waves, the kind of land that made a person feel small in a way that was almost peaceful. She told herself that when the driver let her down at the iron gate of Hartwell Ranch without a word of instruction or welcome. She told herself that again when she carried her own bag up the long gravel path to the house, and stopped telling herself anything at all when she saw the house itself. It wasn't a house. It was a declaration. 3 stories of polished timber and dressed stone with windows tall enough to embarrass a church. Lanterns lit along every rail of the wraparound porch even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. Carriages lined the south drive in a row so perfect it looked rehearsed. Men in evening coats stood on the steps talking with the easy posture of people who had never once in their lives worried about the cost of anything. Elena adjusted the strap of her bag and kept walking. She had been hired by a Mrs. Whitmore, who served as the household manager for Hartwell Ranch. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago at the shop where Elena worked, 6 lines formal and brief, requesting the services of a seamstress for alterations and emergency repairs during a period of extended social engagements. The rate offered was more than she made in 2 months. She had packed her kit the same afternoon. She did not know, standing at the servant's entrance with her knuckles raised to knock, that tonight was not preparation for an event. Tonight was the event itself. Mrs. Whitmore opened the door before Elena's hand fell. The woman was somewhere past 60, with the posture of someone who had spent decades making other people's chaos disappear before anyone noticed it existed. "Miss Cross?" No warmth, no hostility, pure efficiency. "You're late. The stage from Cheyenne ran late. Yes, everything runs late tonight." Mrs. Whitmore was already moving back into the corridor. "Follow me. Don't touch the walls." Elena followed. The inside of the house hit her the way cold water hits skin, immediate and impossible to prepare for. Not the wealth itself, though. It was everywhere in the carved banisters, the oil portraits in their heavy frames, the rugs so thick her boot heels made no sound. It was the sound of people. Laughter music, the bright clatter of glassware, 100 separate conversations layering over each other into a single roar of society in full performance. The formal rooms were already filled. "I thought I was here for alterations," Elena said, keeping her voice low. "You are. 3 gowns need attention before the hour is out. 1 torn seam, 1 broken stay busk, 1 hem that Mrs. Fairfax somehow managed to stand on during the receiving line." Mrs. Whitmore pushed open a door to a small room off the main corridor, a sewing room already prepared with a lamp, a work table, and 3 gowns laid across a long bench. "You will work here. You will not leave this room unless I send for you. You will not speak to the guests. You are invisible tonight. Do you understand?" "Completely," Elena said. She understood invisible. She had been invisible most of her life. Mrs. Whitmore left. Elena set her bag down, lit a second lamp, threaded her needle, and got to work. The torn seam took 12 minutes. The broken busk took 20 and left her fingers sore from forcing the replacement bone into its channel. The hem. The hem was a disaster that someone had made worse by trying to fix it themselves, and by the time Elena had unpicked the damage and begun setting it right, she could hear the dinner bell ringing through the walls. She worked faster. She had just cut her thread when the door opened, and a woman appeared who was not Mrs. Whitmore. This woman was younger, mid-30s, Elena guessed, and beautiful in the way that required effort and resources. Her gown was deep green silk, her hair arranged in a sweep of dark curls. She looked at Elena the way people look at furniture they're considering having removed. "Are you the seamstress?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you're in the wrong room." She stepped inside, letting the door close behind her. "This is my aunt's sitting room. The help uses the back corridor. Mrs. Whitmore brought me here," Elena said, keeping her voice even. The woman she wore no introduction, like a weapon offered. Nothing walked to the work table and looked at the gowns. She picked up the one with the repaired hem without asking, examined it, set it back down. "My aunt's taste has always been unfortunate." She turned back to Elena. "You're not from one of the Cheyenne houses, are you? You don't look it." "No, ma'am." "Where then?" "I work independently." The woman's expression shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Independently, that's a generous word for it." She let her gaze travel down Elena's dress, plain gray wool clean but ordinary, with the particular cruelty of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. "Tell me, does Mrs. Whitmore know she hired someone who doesn't even own a proper gown? This is a formal household event. There's a standard." "The gown is finished," Elena said. "All three of them. I'll leave them here for Mrs. Whitmore and be on my way." "Be on your way?" The woman repeated it with a soft, contemptuous laugh. "You're not leaving anything. My aunt hasn't released you. You'll wait here until you're dismissed like a proper Beatrice." The voice came from the doorway. Male quiet, carrying the particular authority of a man who doesn't raise his voice because he has never needed to. Both women turned. Elena's first impression of Caleb Hartwell was not what she would have expected. She had imagined the owner of this house, this empire of stone and timber and social ambition, as something larger, louder. A man built for performance. He wasn't. He was tall and broad through the shoulder, and he wore his evening clothes like he'd rather not be wearing them at all. His face was the kind that had been handsome once, and was now something more serious than that strong jaw eyes that moved through a room as if cataloging exits. Brown hair, not quite controlled. A small scar at the edge of his left brow that no amount of money had seen fit to remove. He wasn't looking at Elena. He was looking at Beatrice. "Your father is asking for you," he said. Beatrice smoothed her hands over her gown. Something moved through her expression, something complicated and quickly buried. "Of course he is. Caleb, I was just speaking with your father is asking for you," he said again. Exactly the same words, exactly the same tone. An instruction delivered twice. Beatrice held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she moved to the door with the careful grace of someone retreating while refusing to look like it, and was gone. Caleb Hartwell did not watch her leave. He looked at Elena. "Did she give you trouble?" Elena considered the question with the same care she gave her stitching. "She gave me her opinion. I didn't take it." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, something that hadn't decided yet whether to be one. "My mother's gowns. Finished. They're on the bench." He looked at them briefly, then back at her. "You're the seamstress from Cheyenne." Elena Cross. "Mrs. Whitmore said you were the best she could find on short notice." "I'm the best she could find on long notice," Elena said. "The short notice just meant I charged more." This time the corner of his mouth made a decision. It wasn't much of a smile, but it was real. "Fair." He started to turn back toward the hall. "Mr. Hartwell?" She said it before she'd decided to. He paused. "There's a woman in the parlor. I could hear her through the wall when I came through, whose gown has a broken seam along the right shoulder. If she raises her arm past a certain point during the dancing, it's going to fail completely. I can fix it in 10 minutes if she comes here, or you can wait and let it fail in front of your guests." Caleb Hartwell studied her for a moment. "How do you know which woman?" Green wool ivory trim. She was standing near the window when the footman passed by the door. He said nothing for a beat. Then, "I'll send her." He left. Elena picked up her needle. 14 minutes later, the woman in green wool arrived with a gratitude so genuine it almost made up for Beatrice Morrison's particular variety of cruelty. Elena fixed the seam, sent her back, and began packing her kit. That was when the noise from the parlor changed. Not louder, differently loud. The bright social roar shifted into something with an edge to it. Laughter, but harder. Voices cutting through instead of blending. Elena stopped packing. She heard a man's voice heavy with drink, the words slightly loose. Say something she couldn't make out fully, but the shape of it was wrong. The shape was the kind of wrong she had learned to recognize early in her life, the way an animal learns the scent of a predator. Then she heard a woman's voice say sharply, "Do not touch me." She didn't decide to move. She was simply moving down the corridor, following the sound, one hand on the wall of the unfamiliar house. The parlor was at the end of the hall, and the door was open just enough. Elena stopped at the edge. The room held perhaps 30 people. Most of them had arranged themselves with the particular cowardice of crowds turned away just slightly, talking, just a little too determinedly to their neighbors, pretending not to see what was happening in the center of the room. What was happening in the center of the room was a man, large, red-faced, with the confidence of someone who had never once faced a consequence, standing too close to a young woman in a pale blue dress. The young woman had her back to the fireplace mantel. She had nowhere to go. The man had his hand on her arm. "You're being dramatic," he was saying with the cheerful dismissal of the very drunk. "I was only—" "Let go of her arm." Elena said it from the doorway. The words came out of her mouth before her brain had caught up, and once they were said, she could feel every set of eyes in the room find her at once. 30 people. She was wearing gray wool, and she had a sewing kit in her hand, and she had just walked into a room full of Wyoming Territory's finest citizens and issued an instruction. The man with the red face turned and looked at her. "And who?" he said with slow, amused contempt. "Are you someone who told you to let go of her arm?" Elena said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by this. "So let go." A ripple moved through the room, the particular social electricity of a scene that has reached the point of no return. The man's expression shifted from amusement to something uglier. "You're the sewing girl," he said. "Whitmore's little seamstress." He looked at her, up and down the same assessment Beatrice had made, but with an uglier current running under it. "You want to tell me what to do." "I already did." He let go of the young woman's arm, not because Elena had told him to, she understood this immediately, but because he'd decided she was a more interesting target. He took a step toward her. "Let's see," he said. "You come in here, no invitation, no standing, interrupt a private. Mr. Thornton." The room went quiet. Caleb Hartwell was standing at Elena's shoulder. She had not heard him arrive. She did not know how long he had been there or how much he had seen. He walked past her into the center of the room with the unhurried movement of a man who owns the floor beneath every step. He stopped between Elena and the red-faced man Thornton at a distance that was perfectly calculated, close enough to be a statement, far enough to be a question. "I believe my wife was speaking," Caleb said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Elena felt the ripples reach her from 6 feet away. Wife. She did not move. She did not speak. She could feel the blood in her hands and the air in her lungs and the fine edge of a moment that was cutting itself into a before and an after. Thornton blinked. "You're Hartwell, you don't have a gentleman?" Caleb turned from Thornton to the room at large, and his voice lifted just enough to carry. His hand reached back and his fingers found Elena's wrist, and he drew her forward, not roughly, but with the practiced ease of a man completing a gesture he had rehearsed 1,000 times, which she knew was a lie, because she could feel a slight tension in his fingers that told her his heart was beating faster than his face showed. "Meet my wife." He turned to her then, and his eyes met hers for the first time since the lie had left his mouth, and what she saw there was not apology and not triumph, and not even full confidence. It was something rawer than all of that. A man who has just made a move on a board he's not certain he can win, and is asking her without words, without time to play. Elena Cross had taken worse positions than this. She lifted her chin. She put her hand through his arm. She looked at the room the way she imagined a woman who belonged in this room would look at it, with the particular calm of someone who doesn't need permission. "Good evening," she said. The room exhaled. Thornton's expression cycled through confusion, recalculation, and the dawning humiliation of a man who has just realized he has been maneuvered. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Elena. He looked at his glass as though it had failed him. "I wasn't aware," he said stiffly, "that you'd married." "We've been very private about it," Caleb said. The lie came out of him smooth as water. "Elena prefers things that way, don't you, darling?" She did not flinch at the word. "Completely," she said. It was the same word she'd used with Mrs. Whitmore an hour ago, agreeing to be invisible. It tasted different now. Thornton retreated. The crowd around them began the careful social rearrangement of people pretending they had never been watching. Someone started talking loudly about a horse. A woman laughed at something that wasn't funny. The music from the far room started again. The young woman in the blue dress had disappeared. Elena stood with her hand through Caleb Hartwell's arm and felt the full weight of what had just happened pressed down onto her shoulders. A lie had been told. It had been told in front of 30 witnesses. It had been told by one of the most powerful men in Wyoming territory, and she had confirmed it. She couldn't untell it. Neither could he. "Smile," Caleb said quietly, without moving his lips much. "People are still watching." "I know," Elena said. She smiled. "We need to talk." "Yes," he said. "We do. Not here." Obviously not here. They stayed in the parlor for another 20 minutes because leaving immediately would have read as flight, and Elena understood this without being told she was better at reading a room than he knew. She accepted a glass of water from a passing footman. She answered 2 women's questions about where she'd come from, with answers that were technically true and strategically incomplete. She laughed once at something a man said that wasn't particularly funny, because laughing was the right instrument for the moment. Caleb Hartwell stood beside her through all of it. He introduced her to no one else, which was its own strategy, she realized. Fewer introductions meant fewer specific lies that could be checked. He was not unintelligent. She filed that away. Mrs. Whitmore appeared at the edge of the room at some point and looked at Elena with an expression that moved from shock to calculation in under 2 seconds. Elena met her eyes briefly and looked away. That conversation would happen eventually. Not tonight. When they finally moved toward the corridor, Caleb guided her with a hand at the small of her back. Light, correct, the gesture of a man who knows how to perform a marriage in public. And the moment they were through the door and into the empty hall, he removed his hand and put 2 feet of distance between them. "My study," he said. "Down the hall, second left." She followed him without answering. The study was darker than the rest of the house, smelling of leather and paper and something that might have been whiskey. He closed the door. He did not light a lamp. The hall light came through the gap at the bottom enough. He turned to face her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The noise of the party pressed dimly through the walls like something happening in another life. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me considerably more than that." He had the grace not to argue the point. He moved to the chair behind the desk, not to sit in it, just to put something between himself and the conversation. "Thornton is engaged to the Fairfax girl, the one in the blue dress. Her father, Victor Fairfax, is currently negotiating a financial alliance with my family. If Thornton makes trouble at this gathering, if there's a scene, if anything disrupts the negotiations—" "Then you needed to neutralize him," Elena said. "Yes. And I was there." "Yes. And calling me your wife was the first thing you thought of." He looked at her steadily. "It was the fastest thing." Elena set her sewing kit on the corner of his desk, not an act of aggression, just a fact about where her hands needed to be. She looked at him. He was not fidgeting. She respected that. He had done something enormous and was standing with it. "So what happens now?" she said. Now Caleb said, "I need to ask you to continue." Continue. For the duration of this event, through the end of the Fairfax negotiations. 3 weeks, possibly 4. He said it like a man proposing a business transaction which she supposed was exactly what he was doing. You would remain at the ranch. You would be seen in public with me. You would say as little as possible to as few people as possible. You would be compensated. Compensated. Generously. Enough that I suspect it matters, or you wouldn't be here taking sewing work in the first place. Elena felt the truth of that land without flinching. He wasn't wrong. He was making a calculation about her circumstances the same way she had made one about his. "And if I refuse," she said, "then you walk out of this house tonight and I deal with the consequences alone." He said it without drama. "The lie was mine. The choice is yours." She looked at him for a long moment. 3 weeks, she said. Possibly 4. What happened to your real wife? Or were you never married? Something moved behind his eyes. Fast, controlled, gone before she could read it clearly. "Never married," he said. "Why does a man like you need a woman like me to pretend to be his wife? You could have pointed to any woman in that room." Any woman in that room has a family, a reputation, a history in this territory that creates complications. You have nothing, Elena said. He stopped. "You were going to say I have nothing to complicate the situation," she said. "You can say it. I'm not insulted by accurate information." Caleb Hartwell looked at her with something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It was closer to the look of someone who has just recalculated the weight of a thing they picked up carelessly. "I was going to say," he said carefully, "that you have no existing relationship with anyone in this social circle that could create conflicts. That's a kinder way to say the same thing." "Yes," he said. "It is." The party hummed on the other side of the walls. Somewhere a woman laughed at something real this time. Elena could tell the difference. Somewhere, Victor Fairfax was watching for cracks in an alliance he was building brick by careful brick. Somewhere Beatrice Morrison, who had looked at Caleb with that complicated buried thing in her eyes, was thinking about something Elena didn't yet understand. "What's the actual amount?" Elena said. He told her. She kept her face neutral. Inside, she was calculating her sister Margaret's situation, the cost of the doctor in Denver, the school fees that were coming due in the fall. "Double it," she said. Caleb Hartwell blinked. "Once." "Double it," Elena said again. "And I stay 4 weeks and ask no questions about your reasons, and I do whatever public performance is required without complaint." Silence. "And if you won't double it," she continued, "then I go back to Cheyenne tonight, and you handle the Fairfax situation however you handle it. And I won't mention what happened in that parlor to anyone because, frankly, it wouldn't serve me to." He was very still. "You negotiate," he said. "I so?" Elena said. "But I also have a younger sister who needs money I don't have, and a brain that works, and I just looked you in the eye through the longest 20 minutes of my life and pretended to be your wife without a single rehearsal. I think I've demonstrated my value." Another silence. Longer. "Done," Caleb Hartwell said. He held out his hand. Not the way he'd held it in the parlor, not that claimed possessive grip. Flat and open, a business gesture. Elena looked at it. Then she shook it. "Rules," she said. "I need rules." "Such as?" "This is a transaction. I don't need to know your history or your feelings, and you don't need to know mine. We perform in public. In private, I'm a guest in a room you're providing. Nothing crosses that line." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I keep working. If there are garments in this household that need attention, I work on them. I'm not going to spend 4 weeks sitting in a room pretending to be decorative." Something in his expression shifted very slightly. Not quite approval. Something adjacent to it. "Agreed. And if at any point you ask me to do something that compromises my actual integrity, not the performance, my actual integrity, the arrangement ends immediately." He held her gaze. Agreed. She nodded. She picked up her sewing kit. "Where will I sleep?" she said. "The East Wing. Mrs. Whitmore will show you." And Mrs. Whitmore will be told what she needs to know, which is that this is a private matter and none of her business, he said. She'll accept that. She's worked for this family 20 years. She accepts most things. Elena moved toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "The girl in the blue dress," she said. "Adelaide Fairfax. Is she going to be all right?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Thornton will be asked to leave tomorrow morning. I'll see to it personally." "See to it tonight," Elena said, "or I will." He looked at her. "I know you said I have nothing to complicate the situation," she said, "but I have opinions. I can't help it. Can't." She went back out into the corridor before he could answer. She found Mrs. Whitmore near the kitchen and accepted the woman's carefully neutral guidance to the East Wing without discussing what had happened, because Mrs. Whitmore was too professional to ask and too smart to pretend she didn't know. The room was large and quiet and smelled of linen and cedar. Elena set her kit on the bureau and sat on the edge of the bed in her gray wool dress and looked at the ceiling. She had come to this house to be invisible. She had agreed to be a wife. 3 weeks. 4 at the outside. She would take the money, she would perform the role, she would not let any of it matter to her more than it needed to, and she would go home to Margaret with enough in her pocket to fix the problem that had been keeping her awake for 6 months. Caleb Hartwell was cold and controlled, and had grabbed her hand without asking, and turned her life sideways in a single moment, and she did not like him exactly, but she had looked at his eyes in that study when she asked if he'd been married, and she had seen something there that she recognized. The particular careful way a person builds walls around a room inside them that they've decided no one is allowed into anymore. She knew how to do that. She did it herself. She lay back on the bed still dressed and closed her eyes. In the morning she would begin pretending to be Elena Hartwell. Tonight she let herself be simply Elena Cross, a woman who had just made the strangest bargain of her life and who had done it with her eyes open and who was going to be fine. She had survived worse. She was almost certain. Downstairs the party continued. Victor Fairfax sat in conversation with Adelaide Hartwell, Caleb's mother, a woman with silver hair and very little patience for performance of any kind, and listened to her speak about her son's marriage with the calm authority of a woman who had decided to accept a thing before she fully understood it. "Elena," Adelaide said, and said it the way you say a name you've decided to trust. "I haven't met her properly yet. The evening was rushed." "No," Victor said carefully. "No, I suppose it was." Adelaide looked across the room to where Caleb stood talking to a man about land, and her expression held something that might have been relief or might have been question, or might have been both at once. "She has good hands," Adelaide said quietly, half to herself. "A woman who works with her hands that steadily, she's been through something. She knows what things cost." Victor had nothing useful to say to that, so he said nothing. Adelaide Hartwell looked at her son across the room and thought about the years she had watched him close himself off, layer by careful layer, after the engagement that had ended the way it had. She thought about the way he had looked standing next to the woman in gray wool, not performing the way he performed everything now, but slightly off balance the way people look when something has genuinely surprised them. She picked up her tea. Elena, she thought again. She had no idea yet who this woman was, or what had really happened tonight, or what it would cost everyone before it resolved. But she had been alive long enough to know when something real had entered a room. And something real had entered this one. She was awake before the house was. Elena lay still in the gray quiet of the East Wing room and listened to Hartwell Ranch come to life around her, the first footstep in the corridor, the distant clang of the kitchen, the sound of a door opening somewhere below. She had slept in her clothes, and she was not embarrassed about it. She had slept in worse conditions than a cedar-smelling room in a house worth more than everything she had ever owned combined. She sat up. She smoothed her dress as well as it could be smoothed. She unpacked the small case she'd brought 3 days' worth of clothing, because the original letter had mentioned a few days of work at most. and looked at what she had with the clear eye of a woman who has learned not to be sentimental about practicalities. She had 2 dresses besides the gray wool. One was a pale blue cotton decent but plain. The other was a dark brown wool that she wore for travel. Neither of them was what anyone in this house would call appropriate for the wife of Caleb Hartwell. This was going to be a problem. She was thinking through the dimensions of that problem when someone knocked at her door. Not Mrs. Whitmore's efficient rap, something lighter. "Come in," Elena said. The woman who entered was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been classically beautiful once and was now something better, intelligent and direct, with laugh lines at the corners of eyes that were currently doing the work of taking Elena apart and putting her back together with great care and no apparent hostility. Adelaide Hartwell. Elena had seen her briefly the night before across the parlor, talking to Victor Fairfax, with the serenity of a woman who has never once needed to perform composure because she actually possesses it. She was Caleb's mother. She was also, Elena understood immediately, not someone who could be managed with half-truths. "Good morning," Adelaide said. "I thought you might need these." She stepped inside, and Elena saw that she was carrying 2 gowns over her arm, not her own clearly, both of them sized for a slimmer frame. "They belonged to my niece. She left them here last spring and hasn't asked for them back. She won't mind." Elena looked at the gowns. She looked at Adelaide. "Did your son send you?" "My son," Adelaide said pleasantly, "doesn't send me anywhere. I go where I think I'm needed." She laid the gowns across the foot of the bed and sat in the chair by the window with the ease of a woman settling into a room she has every right to be in. "He told me last night after the party. The truth of it." Elena went very still. "Not all of it, I'm sure," Adelaide continued. "Caleb never tells me all of anything. But enough. You came here to work. He made you into something else without asking. And now you've agreed to stay." She folded her hands in her lap. "I wanted to meet the woman who looked my son in the eye and said yes to that." "I said yes to the money," Elena said. "Of course you did. That doesn't mean yes to the money was the only thing in the room." Adelaide studied her with those calm, precise eyes. "What's your sister's name?" Elena blinked. "I didn't tell him about my sister." "No. But you negotiated a doubled rate for a reason that mattered more than yourself and women who do, that are usually doing it for someone they love." Adelaide smiled, brief and real. "I'm not trying to pry. I'm trying to understand what kind of person has walked into my son's life even accidentally." Elena sat on the edge of the bed. She felt oddly that sitting was the honest thing to do, that standing would look like defense. "Margaret," she said. "She's 19. She wants to go to the teacher's college in Denver. There are fees. There's also a doctor she's been seeing for something that's—" She stopped. "It's manageable if I have enough money." "And you don't?" "Not yet." Adelaide nodded slowly. "My son doesn't know how to ask for help. He never has. He turns everything into a transaction because transactions have clear terms and defined endings." She paused. "I suspect you understand something about that." Elena looked at her hands. "Transactions are honest," she said. "You know exactly what you're getting." "Unless," Adelaide said gently, "you get more than you bargained for." She stood then and smoothed her skirt and moved to the door with the unhurried grace of a woman who has made her point and doesn't need to belabor it. "Breakfast is at 7, she said. "Caleb eats in the dining room when we have guests. You'll need to be there." She paused with her hand on the door. "The blue gown will fit you better. The seam on the left shoulder is a little loose. I thought you might enjoy fixing your own clothing for once." She was gone before Elena could decide how to respond to that. Elena looked at the blue gown. She looked at the loose seam. She picked up her needle. She was in the dining room at 2 minutes to 7, with the seam repaired, wearing a dress that fit her almost perfectly, because Adelaide Hartwell had judged the size of a woman she'd never met, with the accuracy of someone who had spent 60 years paying attention to people. Caleb was already at the table. He looked up when she came in. His expression did what it had done in the study, that quick, controlled adjustment. The face of a man who has decided in advance not to react and almost succeeds. "Good morning," he said. Good morning, Elena said. She sat at the chair across from him because it was the one facing the door which she preferred on instinct, and she picked up her fork and they ate in silence for a full 2 minutes before he spoke. My mother came to see you. She brought me clothing. I was going to arrange that. She was faster. He looked at her. Did she? She was kind, Elena said. And honest, which I appreciated more. I told her about my sister. You can ask her what I said if you want the details. She looked at him directly. I won't be a secret from people you trust. If there are people in this house who know the truth, I'd rather know who they are. Caleb was quiet for a moment. My mother, Mrs. Whitmore, no one else. Good. She picked up her coffee. What happens today? The morning it turned out was going to be a great deal more complicated than last night. Victor Fairfax arrived at 9 with his daughter, Adelaide Addie. Everyone called her to distinguish her from Caleb's mother and a legal man named Sutton who had cold eyes and a leather case that he carried like it was full of something fragile and important. They assembled in the main sitting room. Elena was not invited. She understood this. She sat in the sewing room and worked through a pile of household mending Mrs. Whitmore had left, whether out of practicality or mercy she couldn't tell, and she listened to the voices through the wall. She wasn't trying to listen. The walls were simply thin, and the voices were simply clear, and she had a seamstress's habit of working in silence that made her very good at hearing the texture of a room. Victor Fairfax's voice was the one that carried. It had a quality to it smooth on the surface, with a current running underneath that pulled in a direction he didn't always announce. He laughed a great deal. Men who laugh at their own statements too early, Elena had found, were usually managing something they didn't want you to look at too closely. Caleb's voice was lower, controlled. He asked questions that sounded simple and weren't. The legal man said almost nothing, which meant he was there to listen. Legal men who are there to listen are more dangerous than legal men who are there to talk. Addie Fairfax said nothing at all. Elena thought about the blue dress from last night, the mantle at her back, nowhere to go, and felt something harden in her chest. An hour into the meeting, the voices changed pitch, not louder, but tighter. Elena set down the shirt she was mending. Fairfax said something she couldn't quite make out. Then Caleb said clearly, "That's not what was agreed." And Fairfax said just as clearly, "Agreements evolve, Caleb. That's the nature of business." Silence. Then Caleb said, "I'll need to review those documents." And Fairfax said, "Of course, take your time." In the voice of a man who knows exactly how much time you have and has already counted it. Elena picked up the shirt again. She was beginning to understand why Caleb Hartwell needed a wife. Not just for Thornton's scene last night. For something that required him to present a certain face to Victor Fairfax, a man who was renegotiating terms of an agreement, and doing it in a room full of his own people, while Caleb sat alone on his side of the table. A married man looks more settled, more rooted, harder to destabilize. A married man has something to protect and something to lose, which makes him seem like a better risk on paper than a bachelor rattling around in a large empty house. It was all calculation, and the calculation had brought her here, and the money was real, and Margaret's school fees were real, and she was going to keep her eyes open. She was. The meeting broke at noon. Caleb found her in the sewing room 20 minutes later, still working. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. "Some of it," she said. He sat in the chair across from her work table, the chair that Beatrice had stood near last night, examining things that weren't hers, and he sat in it like a man who has been standing for too long and needed a moment that didn't require performance. Elena kept sewing. She had found in her life that people talked more easily when your hands were busy because it made them feel less examined. "Fairfax is changing the terms," Caleb said. "I gathered that. The original agreement was a land partnership, my family's northern range combined with his water rights through the valley. Clean split, shared revenue." He paused. "He's now proposing a debt instrument instead. He wants to loan the ranch capital against the northern range as collateral." Elena stopped sewing. "He wants your land as a guarantee," she said. "If the revenue targets aren't met and he controls the definition of the revenue targets, The collateral can be seized. That's not a partnership, Elena said. That's a trap. Yes. He said it quietly, without drama, with the tone of a man who has just said aloud the thing he's been thinking since 9 o'clock this morning and needed to hear how it sounded outside his own head. Why is he changing terms now? Because he can. My father died 8 months ago. The ranch is in transition. The northern range has a title complication from a survey dispute 6 years ago that was never fully resolved. Fairfax knows that. His legal man has clearly done his homework. Caleb looked at his hands. He also knows I've been running this operation alone since my father's illness without a clear... He stopped. Without a clear sign that the ranch has a future, Elena said. He looked at her. A bachelor on a large estate in a territory where everyone is watching everyone else, she said. No wife, no heirs planned, no particular reason to believe the Hartwell name intends to plant itself here permanently. She picked up the shirt again. That's what last night was about. You needed to look like a man who's staying. Caleb Hartwell looked at her for a long, steady moment. You're perceptive, he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was something more like a recalibration. I've been reading rooms my whole life, Elena said. You learn to when you can't afford to misread them. He was quiet. Then, the Fairfax meeting continues this week. There's a dinner Thursday, a social ride Friday morning if the weather holds, and the Henderson dance next Saturday. The Henderson dance. Annual event. Half the territory attends. It's where alliances get confirmed and reputations get made and unmade. He met her eyes. I need you at all of it. I know, Elena said. She tied off her thread and set the shirt aside and looked at him across the work table. She noticed this with the same practical clarity with which she'd noted the loose seam on the blue gown's shoulder exhausted. Not the visible kind. The deep kind that lives in the jaw and the set of the shoulders and the particular stillness of someone who has been performing for so long that the performance has calcified. She recognized it because she had worn it herself. Ask me something real, she said. He frowned slightly. What? We're going to be in public together all week. We're going to have to answer questions. People who've known you for years are going to ask me things that a wife would know and a stranger wouldn't. She folded her hands on the table. So ask me something real. Get used to what it sounds like. He was still for a moment. Then, where did we meet? Cheyenne, she said. Your family's lawyer had business in town. You came along and met me through a mutual acquaintance. She paused. Who was the acquaintance? He thought. Thomas Reed. He's a solicitor there who handles some of our accounts. He's also dead, which means he can't contradict us. Good. When? 8 months ago, just before my father's death. We corresponded for several months. The marriage was quiet because of the family's grief. Elena nodded. How long have we been married? 6 weeks. 6 weeks is recently enough that I wouldn't know everyone you know. Long enough to be legally real. Yes. What do I call you in public? Something shifted in his expression. It was small. Caleb, he said. And you call me Elena. Obviously. Not darling, she said. Like last night, that red is performed. He looked at her. Did it? To me it did. I don't know if anyone else noticed. She held his gaze. Real couples have their own language. They don't use terms of endearment for an audience. They use them by habit when they forget other people are listening. If you call me darling again in public, do it in the middle of something else when you're not looking at me. Caleb Hartwell was quiet for 3 full seconds. You've thought about this. I think about everything I'm going to do before I do it, Elena said. It's how I've stayed reasonably whole. He stood. He moved to the door. He stopped. My father's name was James, he said without turning around. He died of a lung illness. It was slow and it was not kind. The survey dispute on the northern range, the one Fairfax is using, was something he spent the last year of his life trying to resolve, and he didn't get there. Every time someone mentions the northern range, I think about that. He paused. If anyone asks you what my father was like, which they might to be polite, tell them he was a man who finished what he started. That's what I'd want them to know. He left. Elena sat with that for a moment. A man who finished what he started. A statement about a dead father that was also, she suspected, a statement about the son who was still here. She picked up the next shirt. The dinner Thursday was the first real test. Elena wore the blue gown. She fixed her own hair, which she was competent at, but not skilled, and the result was something between plain and elegant that she decided to call intentional. She came down the stairs at the time Mrs. Whitmore specified and found Caleb waiting in the hall. He looked at her. "Your hair," he said. "I know," Elena said. "It's—" He stopped himself. "I can fix it in 10 minutes if you have a preference." "No." He said it quickly. "It's fine. It's—" Another stop. "It suits you." She looked at him with level eyes. "You can tell me the truth, Caleb. I won't crumble." "I'm telling you the truth," he said, and he had the interesting expression of a man who has just surprised himself slightly. They went in to dinner. Victor Fairfax was all warmth and charm at the table, the way a man is when he's already decided he has the upper hand and can afford generosity. He directed 3 separate questions at Elena. Where had she grown up? How was she finding Wyoming? Had she known the Hartwell family long? She answered all 3 smoothly with the abbreviated truth of a woman who has learned that partial honesty is more convincing than complete fabrication. Addie Fairfax sat at the far end of the table and ate very little and said almost nothing. Elena watched her with the portion of her attention she could spare. The girl was 20, maybe 21. She had the look of someone who has made peace with being moved around like a piece on someone else's board. Elena recognized that look also. Beatrice Morrison was at dinner, was Ate. Elena had not expected this. She hadn't been at the morning meeting and no one had mentioned her, but there she was in that deep green silk, seated 3 chairs from Caleb, watching Elena with eyes that were working harder than the rest of her face. Elena. Victor Fairfax used her name with a warmth that was calibrated to feel personal. "Caleb tells me you grew up in Cheyenne." "The Cheyenne area," Elena said. "A smaller town outside. We moved to Cheyenne proper when I was 15. And your family?" "My father was in the trades." That was technically true. He had traded in a great many things, most of which hadn't worked out. "And Mrs. Cross, your mother?" "She passed when I was 17, Elena said. She kept her voice entirely even. "Fever." A small, appropriate silence fell around the table. People who ask questions about the dead get silence back, and the silence ends the question. Elena had learned this also. "I'm sorry," Victor said with the practiced sincerity of someone who is not sorry but knows how to perform it. "Well, Caleb is lucky to have found someone with such—" He paused, and the pause itself was a blade, such practical good sense. Not every woman could step into a household like this. "Not every household is worth stepping into," Elena said pleasantly. Victor Fairfax laughed. Caleb's hand under the table found the back of her chair, not touching her just there, and she understood it as the particular signal of a man who has just seen something that surprised him and wants to mark the moment without showing it. Beatrice Morrison did not laugh. After dinner, the men went to the study. Elena found herself in the parlor with Adelaide Hartwell, Senior Addie Fairfax, and Beatrice, a configuration of women that had the social temperature of a room in which everyone is holding something sharp and pretending not to be. Adelaide Sr. handled it with the unhurried mastery of 60 years of practice. She drew Addie into a conversation about Denver had she visited, what did she think of the new library, and kept her there with the focused warmth of a woman who has seen a young girl with nowhere to stand and decided to give her somewhere. This left Elena with Beatrice. Beatrice sat across from her with a glass of wine she was nursing, with the care of someone who wants the glass in her hand, and does not want what's in it to affect her clarity. "You're not what I expected," Beatrice said. "What did you expect?" "Something softer." Caleb has always been drawn to women who need protecting. She said it with a smile that was doing a great deal of work. His last engagement, did he tell you about it? He mentioned it briefly, Elena said, an outright lie delivered with the calm of a statement of weather. Charlotte was well. Beatrice smoothed her skirt. Beautiful, very certain of herself, very accomplished socially. All the things that mattered in this territory. She paused. She left him for a man with better prospects, just before the wedding. It was a small tilt of the head, the performance of sympathy, very hard for him. I imagine it was, Elena said. He's been careful since. Very. Another pause, another blade, contained. That sounds like something you'd know from close observation, Elena said. Beatrice looked at her with the first real expression she'd worn all evening, not calculated, just sharp. We've known each other a long time, she said. Our families have adjacent land. We've been neighbors. I know what neighbors are, Elena said. I know what long time means also. She looked at Beatrice with the direct calm of a woman who has spent years reading rooms and is done pretending she isn't. I'm not interested in competing over who knows him better. I married him. The knowing happened after. Beatrice's wineglass stopped moving. He didn't tell you about Charlotte, she said. Not a question anymore. I don't need his history to know him now, Elena said. Beatrice looked at her for a long moment. The calculation was visible, the reassessment, the reaching for a new approach. Adelaide Sr. said something to Addie at the other end of the room, and Addie actually laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and Beatrice's attention cut to it like a reflex, and then came back to Elena. You should know, Beatrice said more quietly now, the performance stripped back to something closer to direct, that Victor Fairfax is not a man who does business. He's a man who acquires things. The partnership Caleb thinks he's in, it's not a partnership. It never was. Elena looked at her. Why are you telling me this? She said. Beatrice held her gaze. Because I've known Caleb Hartwell for 15 years, and whatever you are, and wherever you came from, you're sitting in that dining room answering Fairfax's questions better than half the men I know, and someone ought to. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. Just tell him to get his own lawyer, she said. Not the family solicitor. Someone who doesn't owe Fairfax anything. She stood. She moved to the window and was done talking. Elena sat with this. She sat with the fact that she had been warned by the last person she would have expected to warn her. She sat with the fact that Beatrice Morrison, who had looked at her with calculated contempt last night and sharp jealousy this evening, had just handed her something real. People were more complicated than their first positions. Elena knew this. She had still been surprised. She found Caleb in the hall later when the Fairfaxes had gone and the house had quieted, and she stopped him with a hand on his arm, brief and light, because she was allowed to touch him in the performance of this, which meant she had to be careful about the shape of every touch. Get a different lawyer, she said. Not the family solicitor, someone independent, quickly. He looked at her. Where did that come from? Does it matter? He studied her. Yes, he said. It matters. Beatrice Morrison. The look that crossed his face was complicated surprise, then something that was almost hurt, then a quick, careful lid put over both. Beatrice told you that. She said Fairfax acquires things, that the partnership was never a partnership. Elena kept her voice low. I don't know if she's right. I don't know her well enough yet, but she said it like someone saying a true thing they'd been holding on to, not like someone who was building toward something. Caleb was silent for a long moment. I'll contact someone in Laramie in the morning, he said. Good. She started to step past him. He said her name, not Elena Hartwell. Just her name, the way it sounded in a hall at 11 o'clock at night when the performance was over. She stopped. Why? He said. Why what? Why tell me? You could have stayed out of it. You're here for 4 weeks. The business situation isn't your problem. Elena thought about James Hartwell, who had finished what he started and hadn't gotten there. She thought about the Northern Range and the survey dispute and the debt instrument and the trap that was being set in plain sight for a man who was standing in it and trying to work out the shape of it alone. "Because I noticed something wrong, and I was in a position to say so," she said. "That's all. I don't have a larger reason." She went upstairs. She lay in the cedar-smelling room and looked at the ceiling and told herself this was a transaction and that telling him about Beatrice's warning was a transactional thing, a service rendered within the agreed terms, and that the way it had felt when he said her name in the quiet hall, like a door being tested that was not quite latched, was not something she needed to examine further. She was here for the money. She was here for Margaret. She was not here to fix Caleb Hartwell's problems or understand Caleb Hartwell's grief, or notice the way his jaw tightened when someone mentioned the Northern Range and she could hear his dead father in it. She wasn't here for any of that. She closed her eyes. Down the hall in his study, Caleb Hartwell sat with a sheet of paper and wrote a letter to a lawyer in Laramie who did not owe Victor Fairfax anything. He wrote it carefully in the contained, precise way he did everything. He sealed it. He set it aside for the morning post. He sat back in his chair. He thought about a woman in a gray dress who had stood up in a room full of people who could crush her and told a man to let go. He thought about the dinner table and the way she had looked at Victor Fairfax's warmth with the same cool attention she gave a seam that needed checking. Not hostile, just accurate. He thought about what she'd said in the sewing room. Real couples have their own language. He had not had a conversation like today's in a very long time. The kind where someone sits across from you and says real things and expects real things back and doesn't use any of it as leverage. Charlotte had talked to him for 2 years, and in the end, he'd found out she'd been collecting information the whole time, building a case for the better offer she'd eventually taken. He had decided after Charlotte that people who wanted things from him would always use him to get them, and the only safe arrangement was one with a clear exchange and defined terms. Elena Cross had a clear exchange and defined terms. She had also told him to get a lawyer and explained why, with a calm he couldn't fault, and she had gotten that information from a woman who had every reason to let Elena fail, and she had told him anyway. He picked up his pen. He put it down. He turned off the lamp. He sat for a while in the dark of his study, in the house his father had built, listening to the ranch settle around him, the timber walls, the horses in the far barn, the wind coming off the mountains, and he thought about a door that was not quite latched, and he made no decisions about it at all. The lawyer from Laramie arrived on a Tuesday 4 days before the Henderson dance, and his name was Gerald Holt. A thin, careful man in his 40s who carried 2 cases instead of 1 and had the habit of listening to the last 3 words of whatever you said before he responded, as if he needed to be sure you were finished before he began. Elena liked him immediately. He had the quality of someone who understood that the truth was usually simpler than the people hiding it wanted it to be. She was not supposed to be in the meeting. She had not been invited, and Caleb had not suggested it, and the arrangement between them was clear enough that she understood the boundaries without them being spelled out every time. She was the public face of a private transaction. The business of the ranch was not her business. She was passing the study door with a basket of mending at 9 in the morning when she heard Holt say, "The survey dispute isn't the problem. The survey dispute is what they want you to focus on." She stopped. She stood in the corridor with the basket in her hands, and she listened because she had spent her whole life knowing when a sentence contained more than its surface, and that sentence contained a great deal more. "Explain that," Caleb said. "The Northern Range survey, yes, there's a title complication, and yes, Fairfax knows about it, but it's resolvable. 6 months, maybe 8, with the right filing. That's not what makes this dangerous." Holt's voice was steady and dry, the voice of a man who delivers bad news often enough that he's stopped apologizing for it. "What makes this dangerous is the water rights clause buried in Article 7 of the proposed debt instrument. If the Northern Range survey isn't cleared within a period, Fairfax's people have set at 90 days, which is deliberately shorter than any realistic resolution timeline. The collateral seizure extends not just to the Northern Range, but to the primary water access for the entire Eastern Valley." Silence. "He'd control the water," Caleb said. His voice was very quiet. He'd control the water, Holt confirmed. And every ranch that depends on that water access, which is most of them in a 20-mile radius, would be negotiating with Fairfax for survival, instead of with each other for growth. You'd be the domino that falls first, and you'd take half the territory with you. Elena stood in the corridor with the mending basket and felt something cold and precise settle into place in her chest. This was not a business dispute. This was demolition plan to look like partnership. Fairfax hadn't come here to build something with Caleb. He'd come here to use Caleb's vulnerable moment. His father's death, the unsettled estate, the appearance of instability as the fulcrum for something much larger. She pushed the door open and walked in. Both men looked up, Holt with mild surprise, Caleb with something more complicated, not anger, but the controlled tension of a man whose boundary has just been moved without his permission. Elena. Article 7, she said. She set the basket down. She looked at Holt. Can it be challenged? Holt looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Elena. A beat past the particular beat of a man deciding between two versions of the conversation he's in. She stays, he said. Holt turned back to her. The clause itself isn't illegal. It's unconscionable in my opinion, but unconscionable isn't a legal standard that holds in a territorial court without significant evidence of fraudulent intent. He opened one of his cases. What could challenge it is if we can demonstrate that the 90-day window was deliberately set to be impossible, that Fairfax's people had prior knowledge of the survey timeline and structured the clause around that knowledge to ensure default. Do they have that prior knowledge? Elena asked. I don't know yet. Holt pulled out a document. But I know the survey dispute was filed with the Territorial Land Office 6 years ago, and those records are public, which means anyone who wanted to know the realistic resolution timeline could have accessed them. He set the document on the desk. If someone accessed those records recently within the last year, say there would be a record of the inquiry. Territorial land offices aren't sophisticated. They log visits. Elena looked at the document. She looked at Caleb. How do we get those logs? She said. Caleb was watching her with that recalibrating look again. The one she'd noticed at dinner at the table in the study the first night. The look of a man who keeps reaching for one version of a situation and finding a different one. I can file a records request, Holt said. It takes 2 weeks minimum. That's too slow, Elena said. The Henderson dance is Saturday. Whatever Fairfax is going to do next, he's going to do it there. These events are where he confirms things. He said it himself at dinner. He likes to conclude agreements in social settings. Less formal. Harder to dispute the terms afterward. Holt looked at her with the evaluating steadiness of a man who has just revised his estimate of someone. She's right, he said to Caleb. I know, Caleb said. Then we need the logs before Saturday, Elena said. Is there someone at the land office? Thomas Greer, Caleb said. He said it like a man pulling a file from a drawer. He's been the senior clerk there 11 years. He went to school with my father. He was already standing. I'll ride out this afternoon. Take Holt with you, Elena said, and take a letter from your mother. Adelaide Hartwell's name means something in this territory. Greer will open a drawer faster for her than for a lawyer. Another one of those silences. Holt made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, and was definitely approval. Caleb looked at her steadily. You've been thinking about this. I've been listening, Elena said. She picked up the basket. I'll be in the sewing room. Tell me what Greer says when you get back. She left before he could answer. She heard him start talking to Holt again before she reached the end of the corridor, and the conversation had moved from the slow, careful pace of two men feeling out a situation to something faster and more direct. She went to the sewing room and picked up her needle and tried very hard not to think about the fact that she had just walked into a meeting she wasn't invited to and told a man what to do in his own house in front of his own lawyer, and that the thing she was having the most trouble with was that it had felt entirely natural. The social ride Friday morning was Fairfax's idea. It was framed as leisure 8-riders, including Caleb and Elena and the Fairfax family, and several neighboring ranchers Fairfax had been cultivating, and it had the shape of leisure, and the weight of anything but. Horses and open air, and the kind of conversation that looks like nothing, and means everything. Who laughs at whose joke, who rides next to whom, who speaks and who listens, and what silences say. Elena had not told Caleb that she was not in any practical sense an accomplished rider. She had been on horseback perhaps a dozen times in her life. She knew the mechanics, she could manage. She had told herself this on the way to the stable, and kept telling herself while the stable hand helped her mount, and she settled into the saddle with the careful neutrality of someone who is doing something hard and has decided not to look like it. She managed for the first 20 minutes. Then the group crossed from the flat meadow into the rougher ground at the base of the North Ridge, and the horse a bay mare named Hazel, who had opinions, decided that the transition was an appropriate moment to demonstrate those opinions at some speed. Elena held on. She did not fall. But it was close, and she knew it was close, and when Caleb appeared at her left side, seemingly from nowhere, because he had been at the front of the group, and was now here, his hand was on Hazel's bridle, and the mare had steadied, and Elena was breathing in the careful way of someone who has just made peace with almost failing. "All right," he said, quiet, just to her. "Fine," she said. "You're not an experienced rider. I'm experienced enough not to fall." Barely. But there was no sting in it. He kept his horse close to hers as the group moved forward. Not performatively, no one else would have read it as anything but a husband staying near his wife on difficult terrain. But he stayed. Victor Fairfax pulled alongside them at the next flat stretch. "Caleb, I wanted to raise the Thursday question, the formal signing. I was thinking we might handle it Saturday evening after the Henderson dance. Make a night of it." He smiled with the warmth of a man who has already written the end of the story and is just waiting for everyone else to catch up to it. "That works," Caleb said easily, "though my lawyer has a few points he'd like to discuss before we reach the final language." Something moved through Fairfax's eyes, fast, smooth, contained. Of course, Holt wasn't it from Laramie. "That's right." Independent counsel, smart. Another smile. "A man who takes things seriously." "My father taught me to," Caleb said. The smile stayed on Fairfax's face. The warmth left his eyes. He dropped back to ride with one of the ranchers, and the conversation moved on. Elena kept her eyes forward. Her heart was still beating faster than she wanted from the near fall, or from something else she wasn't certain. Caleb said quietly beside her, "Greer found the log." She turned to look at him. Fairfax's legal man, Sutton, visited the land office 14 months ago. He pulled the full survey file and the associated timeline documentation. He kept his voice low, steady, the same tone as discussing the weather. "Holt is drafting an affidavit. 14 months ago," Elena said. "Before my father died. Before the estate entered any kind of transition. Before there was any obvious vulnerability." He paused. This was planned from the beginning. Elena absorbed that. The deliberateness of it, the long timeline, the patience, the careful construction of an opportunity, told her something about Victor Fairfax that the charm and the warmth and the calculated laughter at dinner had been covering. "He targeted your father," she said. "He targeted the ranch," Caleb said. "My father was just the timing." "That's worse," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." They rode back in a group that looked like a pleasant Friday excursion, and felt, at least to Elena, like two sides of a thing moving toward a collision at whatever speed Saturday would set. The practice for the dance happened that same evening, and it was Adelaide Sr.'s idea. She announced it at supper with the calm authority of someone who has decided a thing is necessary and sees no reason to debate it. Caleb would need to dance with Elena at the Henderson event, because it was expected of a married couple, and she had seen the way her son danced at the last 3 social events, which was to say she had seen him avoid it with the determination of a man who has decided that dancing is a form of vulnerability he can live without. "I'm not practicing dancing in my own house," Caleb said. "You are," Adelaide said. "Mother, the Henderson dance is attended by 200 people who will be watching you and Elena with the specific attention of people who have heard or will hear that the Hartwell marriage was somewhat sudden. You will dance with your wife. You will dance well enough that no one questions the comfort between you." She passed the bread without looking up. "You have one evening to practice. I suggest you use it." Elena looked at Caleb across the table. He looked at her. He had the expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he loves and is deciding whether to be amused or resigned. He chose resigned, which was the wiser option. After supper, Mrs. Whitmore moved the furniture in the sitting room with the efficiency of someone who has done it before and has opinions about how it should be arranged. Adelaide seated herself in the chair by the window and said nothing further because she had already said everything that needed saying. Caleb stood in the center of the cleared floor and looked at Elena. "I don't actually dislike dancing," he said in a tone that suggested he was explaining this for accuracy rather than to impress anyone. "You just dislike what it requires," Elena said. "And what does it require? Being close to someone and trusting them not to make it strange." He looked at her. "That's a very specific description of dancing. It's a very specific problem with dancing." She stepped forward. She put one hand in his and her other hand at his shoulder. "I'll follow. Lead when you're ready." He didn't hesitate, which surprised her. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had been telling the truth. He could dance, and he could lead, and the first few measures of the rhythm, he hummed low under his breath, were just the sound of a man counting himself into something. They moved. The room was quiet, except for that sound and their feet, and the occasional shift of Adelaide's chair. Outside, the wind had picked up the first edge of a storm that had been building since noon, working its way down from the mountains. Elena had danced before, not in rooms like this, not with men like him, but she knew the mechanics, and she had a good sense of rhythm, and she was finding a body that disagreed with the instructions her brain was issuing about maintaining appropriate distance. It wasn't that he was holding her closer than was necessary for the dance. It was that necessary was already close, and close was already doing something to the air between them that she had not anticipated and did not know what to do with. "You're stiff," he said. "I'm fine." "You were lighter on the horse." "The horse wasn't this close," she said. He went quiet. They kept moving. The wind hit the side of the house, and the lamp on the side table flickered, and Adelaide said nothing, and Elena looked at the middle distance over Caleb's shoulder, and thought about Margaret and Laramie, and survey records, and all the practical, grounded, real things she was here for. "Charlotte," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. His shoulder tensed under her hand. "Beatrice told you." "She said Charlotte left you before the wedding. For someone else." She kept her voice even. "You don't have to tell me the rest." "Then why bring it up?" "Because you're the most controlled person I've met in a long time, and I keep wondering what taught you that." She looked at him now, not the middle distance. "You don't have to answer." He looked back at her. The lamp flickered again. Outside, the storm was making up its mind. "She told me she loved me," he said. His voice was flat but not empty. The flatness of someone who has compressed something very large into a very small space. "For 2 years. She said it often. She was convincing." A pause. "Her father had debts. There was a man in Denver with capital and no particular romantic instincts who needed a socially accomplished wife. She weighed her options and made her choice and explained it to me in a letter because she had left 2 days before the wedding and didn't want to discuss it in person." Elena listened without moving, without speaking. "The part that stayed with me," he said, "wasn't the leaving. It was the 2 years. All the things she said, He stopped, started again. "I couldn't trust any of it afterward. Couldn't tell which parts were real and which were..." Another stop. "Performance," Elena said quietly. "Yes." "So you decided to only do business," she said. "Because business is honest about what it is." He looked at her for a long moment. They had stopped moving, and neither of them had noted it. "You understand that very fast," he said. "I told you. I read rooms." "This isn't a room." "No," she said. "It isn't." The storm hit the house fully, then a crack of wind that rattled the windows and took the lamp out entirely. The room went dark, except for the faint gray light coming through the glass, the particular blue dark of a storm at 9 in the evening, with no moon getting through. Adelaide's voice came from the chair. "I'll get another lamp." Her footsteps crossed the room. The door opened. And then she was gone. And the room was very quiet and very dark, and Elena was still standing close to Caleb Hartwell, with her hand in his, and his hand at her waist, and neither of them had moved. She should step back. She knew this. The sensible transactional defined terms thing was to step back and say something practical and wait for the lamp. She didn't step back. He didn't let go. Elena. Her name in his voice, in the dark, low, and careful, like a man walking toward a thing he doesn't quite trust his footing near. "I know," she said. She meant I know what this is and what it isn't and what we agreed to. But her voice didn't carry all of that. Her voice just carried her name back at him in the same careful register, and that was not the same thing at all. His thumb moved. Once. Across the back of her hand where he was holding it. Not the dance grip anymore, just holding. And the one motion of his thumb across her knuckles was the smallest thing, and simultaneously the thing that took the air out of the room completely. She moved. Not back. Forward. The inch that closed the remaining space, and then his forehead was against hers, and they were both very still and very awake. And the storm pushed against the house, and the dark held them, and neither of them said the sensible thing. He kissed her. She kissed him back. It lasted 6 seconds, maybe 8. Long enough to be entirely real, and too long to be accidental, and short enough that when he pulled back, there was still a question about what exactly had happened, and what it meant, and whether either of them was going to survive having it be real. He let go of her hand. He took a step back. She heard him breathe. "We agreed," he said. His voice was controlled and rough at the same time. "I know," she said. "No feelings." "I know Caleb. That wasn't—" He stopped, started again. "That was—" "I know what it was," she said. And then, because honesty had been the only thing between them that worked, "And so do you." Adelaide came back through the door with a lamp and the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who has decided to know exactly as much as she chooses to know. She set the lamp on the table. She looked at both of them with an expression that did not change. "You should practice the turn," she said. "The Henderson floor has a corner that catches people off guard." Caleb moved back to position. Elena put her hand in his again. They practiced the turn. They did not speak. The lamp burned steadily this time. Adelaide watched them with the eyes of a woman who has lived long enough to know that the moments that change everything rarely announce themselves, and that the ones that look the most like nothing are usually the ones that last. The next morning, Caleb was gone before breakfast. Mrs. Whitmore said he'd ridden out early to the North Range. Elena ate alone and said nothing, and thought about 6 seconds in a dark room and a thumb moving once across the back of a hand. Holt arrived at 10 with the completed affidavit and spread 3 documents across the sewing room table because the study felt like Caleb's, and he seemed to understand without being told that this conversation should happen somewhere neutral. "We have enough," he said. Sutton's visit to the land office 14 months ago, combined with the 90-day clause and the survey timeline, is sufficient to bring a fraudulent misrepresentation claim in territorial court. Not a certainty, but a strong case. "Can we bring it before the dance?" Elena asked. "We can threaten to," Holt said, "which might be more effective." He looked at her steadily. "You'd be exposing the entire scheme in front of the same social community Fairfax has been cultivating, publicly, at an event he considers his stage." "Yes," Elena said. "That's aggressive." "He planned this for over a year," Elena said. "He drove out to a land office and pulled files while a man was dying so he could position himself to take everything that man built." She looked at the documents. "Aggressive seems proportionate." Holt was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. "I'll prepare a summary document, something that can be presented to the other ranchers, the ones Fairfax has been cultivating, if they see the water rights clause and what it means for their access. They'll understand they were targets too, Elena finished. Yes, he started writing. I'll need someone who can speak clearly to the implications. Not me, I'm outside counsel and lawyers make people defensive. Someone with standing in the community. Someone they trust. Elena thought. Adelaide Hartwell. Holt looked up. Caleb's mother, Elena said. She has 60 years of relationships in this territory. She knows every rancher who'll be at that dance, and she already knows what's happening. Caleb told her. She paused. Ask her, she'll say yes. Holt wrote something down. You're not from here, he said. You've been here less than 2 weeks. How do you know who people trust? Elena thought about the dining room table and the parlor and the horse on the north ridge, and 100 small, careful observations, filed and kept. I pay attention, she said. Holt nodded once. He kept writing. Elena looked at the documents spread across her work table. She looked at the survey dispute records and the land office log with Sutton's name on it, and the draft affidavit with its clear, dry language laying out the shape of a scheme that a man had built over more than a year to take apart something another man had spent his life building. She thought about James Hartwell, who had died without finishing this particular fight. She thought about his son, who had ridden out to the North Range this morning instead of sitting across from her at breakfast because 6 seconds in a dark room had frightened him more than Victor Fairfax did. And she understood that because she was frightened too. And she was handling it by doing something useful, and apparently he was handling it by putting distance between them, which was the same instinct expressed differently. She picked up her needle. She had the Henderson dress to finish a gown Adelaide Sr. had commissioned from the dressmaker in Cheyenne that had arrived with the neckline wrong, and which Elena had been quietly correcting for the past 2 days. She worked on it now, with the focused attention she gave everything that mattered, which was everything, because she had learned early that the quality of your attention is the quality of your life. Caleb came back from the North Range at 4 in the afternoon. She heard his boots in the corridor. She heard them stop outside the sewing room door. She did not look up. The door opened. Holt said you were in here, he said. I'm always in here, she said. He came in. He did not sit. He stood near the door in the way of a man who has not decided yet whether he's staying. Elena. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she had not seen from him before, not the controlled, calibrated face he showed the world, not the slight warmth he'd let show in the study, sometimes not the tension of the business meetings. Something rawer. The face of a man who rode out to an empty field to think, and came back with the same problem he left with. Last night, he started. Doesn't have to be a problem, she said. It breaks the agreement. We can adjust the agreement. He stared at her. That's not... He stopped. You can't just... Why not? She said. We made it. We can adjust it. Elena. Her name again the way he'd said it in the dark. I don't... He pressed his hand against the doorframe, a single grounded gesture. I don't know how to do this in a way that doesn't end badly. She set down her needle and looked at him directly. I know, she said. I don't either. She held his gaze. I'm also not going to pretend last night was nothing. I'm not built for that particular kind of dishonesty. The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. The dance is tomorrow, he said finally. Yes. We need to be. I know what we need to be, she said. I'll be it, so will you. She picked up her needle again. One thing at a time, Caleb. He stayed in the doorway for another moment. Then he said, The dress, is it finished? Almost. It'll be ready by tomorrow. Everything I touch is ready when it needs to be, she said. That's what I do. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He left. Elena sat alone in the sewing room with the lamp burning and the Henderson dress nearly done, and the affidavit in Holt's case, and the whole weight of Saturday pressing toward her like the storm had pressed against the house last night. She thought about a man who couldn't trust love because the last person who'd said they loved him had been lying for 2 years. She thought about a woman herself who had spent so long being practical and transactional and useful that she wasn't entirely sure she remembered how to want something that didn't come with defined terms. She thought about 6 seconds. She tied off the thread on the Henderson dress. She held it up and checked the line and the fall and the neckline she had corrected, and it was exactly right, and she set it aside. Tomorrow, they were going to walk into a room of 200 people and finish this. She was going to be at his side when they did it, and she had stopped pretending even to herself that the reason was purely the money. The Henderson dance began at 7, and by 6:30, Elena was dressed and standing in the upstairs corridor outside her room because the room felt too small and the house felt too quiet, and she needed somewhere to put the particular quality of waiting that had been building in her chest since she woke up that morning. She heard Caleb's door open. He came out and stopped when he saw her. He was in his formal coat, black, well-cut, the kind of clothing that fit a man correctly when the man was actually built like that and not performing a version of it. He had made some attempt at his hair. It had not fully cooperated. She noticed this the way she noticed the loose seam on a shoulder or the tension in a turned hem as information accurate and without judgment. He looked at her. She was wearing the corrected gown, the one she had fixed herself with the neckline set right, and the fall of the skirt exactly as it should be, and the color a deep blue that was almost slate, doing something to her eyes that she hadn't anticipated when she'd chosen it, and was now choosing not to think about too carefully. "You fixed the neckline," he said. "It was wrong. It looks—" He stopped in the way he stopped sometimes when the sentence had gotten ahead of his caution. "Right," he said. "It looks right." "Thank you," she said, because accepting the thing plainly was more honest than deflecting it. They stood in the corridor for a moment that had a shape to it, not quite the dark sitting room from the night before last, but made of the same material. "Are you ready?" he said. "I've been ready since 5, she said. "I'm a very early person when I'm anxious." He looked at her with something that wanted to be amusement and arrived as something warmer. "You're anxious. We're about to walk into a room of 200 people carrying a legal document that will humiliate one of the most powerful men in the territory while pretending to be a happily married couple." She held his gaze. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't." "Good," he said. She blinked. "I'd be worried if you weren't," he said. "Anxious means you understand the stakes. I've been anxious since 4 this morning." "You don't look it." "I've had more practice hiding it." He held out his arm. "Adelaide is waiting downstairs. She's been waiting since 6. She's not anxious. She's activated." Elena took his arm. "Your mother frightens me slightly," she said as they started down the stairs. "She frightens everyone slightly," he said. "She considers it a service." Adelaide was indeed waiting at the foot of the stairs, wearing a silver gown that had the authority of a declaration with Holt's summary document folded precisely in her small evening bag, and an expression of focused calm that made Elena think of a woman walking onto a battlefield she has already mapped in her head. "The Calloways will be there," Adelaide said, as though they were continuing a conversation already in progress. "Henry Calloway's water access runs directly through the Eastern Valley. Once he understands what that clause means for his operation, he'll turn. And where Henry turns, the Murrays follow." She smoothed her gloves. "I'll find them within the first 30 minutes. "Don't approach Fairfax directly," Caleb said. "I wasn't born yesterday," Adelaide said pleasantly. "I'll let the document do the approaching. I'm simply going to make sure the right people read it before he's had enough champagne to be charming about everything." She moved to the door. Elena looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the ceiling briefly in the way of a man who loves his mother completely and is regularly astounded by her. "One thing at a time," Elena said. He looked at her. The words were hers from the sewing room yesterday, and she'd said them then to him, and now she was saying them back to herself, and he knew that, and she knew that he knew, and neither of them said anything further. They went out into the evening. The Henderson home was the largest private residence in the county after Hartwell Ranch itself, which meant the ballroom held 200 easily, and tonight was going to test that capacity. Elena could hear the music from the drive. She could see the windows lit from inside with the particular golden excess of a family that hosts this event every year and considers it a responsibility as much as a pleasure. They walked in together. Caleb's hand was at the small of her back, the same light correct placement as the parlor that first night, the performance touch. Except she knew now what his hand felt like when it wasn't performing, and the distinction was not something she could unknow. The room noticed them. This was the thing she'd been told and believed intellectually, but had not quite prepared for. Emotionally, the room noticed them the moment they were through the door. Because Caleb Hartwell's sudden marriage was the most interesting thing to happen in this social circle. In years, and every person there had formed an opinion about it before laying eyes on her, and now they were laying eyes on her, and the assessment was visible on 100 faces doing their best to look like they weren't assessing. Elena lifted her chin. She smiled at the first person who caught her eye. A woman in burgundy mid-50s, with the look of someone whose opinion matters in a room and who knows it. Elena held the smile the exact right amount of time, long enough to be warm, short enough to be selective. The woman smiled back. Caleb felt it, she knew, because his hand shifted slightly at her back. A fractional adjustment that was not the public gesture anymore, but something more reflexive. She was doing something that was working, and he could feel it. The first 30 minutes were performance, and Elena was very good at performance. She met 6 couples whose names she filed immediately and accurately. She answered 4 questions about herself with the calibrated half-truths she and Caleb had rehearsed, and 3 additional questions she hadn't rehearsed with answers she assembled on the spot from the truth of her actual life, lightly edited. She laughed twice at things that were genuinely funny, and once at something that wasn't, but required it socially, and she could feel in the way you feel. A room-shifting weight, the 200 people around her in the process of making up their minds about her. Victor Fairfax found them at the 40-minute mark. He was in excellent spirits. The spirits of a man who has arrived at an event he considers the final move of a long game and is already tasting the conclusion. He kissed Elena's hand with a charm that was so polished it had stopped being personal and become a tool, and he told Caleb he was looking forward to the evening and the formalization of their arrangement, and he said all of this with the warm confidence of a man who does not yet know the board has changed. "Tonight," Fairfax said, "we'll finalize after the dancing. Sutton has the documents." "Gerald Holt has some questions about the language," Caleb said. "A few specific points in Article 7 he'd like to discuss." The warmth in Fairfax's eyes adjusted barely, like a man who has heard a note slightly off-key and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. "Article 7 is standard boilerplate," he said. "I'm sure Holt will see that when he has a chance to review it more carefully." "He has reviewed it carefully," Caleb said. "That's what the questions are about." Fairfax smiled with all his teeth. "Well, we'll talk later." He moved off into the room, and Elena watched him go with the attention of someone tracking weather. "He knows something is wrong," she said. "Yes," Caleb said. "How long before he finds out what? Depends on how fast my mother moves." Adelaide, as it turned out, moved very fast. Elena saw it happening from the dance floor because they danced as planned, and she was grateful for Thursday evening's practice, even though she had spent Thursday evening thinking about other things. Caleb led cleanly and kept his hand at her waist with the ease of a man who has decided that the fear of a thing and the doing of it can coexist, and she followed him and kept her eyes appropriately on him and not on the edges of the room where Adelaide was working. She caught glimpses. Adelaide with Henry Calloway, a large weathered man who bent his head to read something she was showing him and then straightened with an expression that had moved from polite attention to something considerably sharper. Adelaide with a couple Elena didn't recognize, and then with 3 men who stood close together and talked in the low, urgent way of people processing a shared problem. Adelaide moving through the room with the steady, unhurried purpose of someone who knows where every piece needs to go and has all evening to place them. "Your mother is remarkable," Elena said. "I know," Caleb said. "She loves you very much." He was quiet for half a measure. "I know that too. She was watching us practice Thursday night, and she wasn't watching to make sure the steps were right." Another half measure. "Elena, I'm just saying what I saw," she said. "I'm not asking you to do anything about it." He looked at her. really looked not the public performance of a husband looking at his wife, but the actual thing, which was more complicated and less controlled and made the breath in her chest do something inconvenient. "One thing at a time," he said. Her words again back at her again. The way couples do, trading phrases, building a private language from shared moments. She heard it, and she knew he heard it, and neither of them said anything further because the music was still going, and there were still 200 people watching. The twist came at the 90-minute mark, and it did not come from the direction Elena was watching. Beatrice Morrison had been at the edge of her attention all evening in the green silk again, moving through the room with the practiced social ease of a woman who has attended these events her whole life and knows every current in them. Elena had noted her without focusing on her. There were larger things to watch. She should have watched more carefully. It was Addie Fairfax who found her Addie in pale yellow this evening, looking somewhat less like a girl who had been backed against a mantle, and somewhat more like a girl who had made a decision about something. She appeared at Elena's left elbow during a break in the dancing, when Caleb had been pulled aside by Henry Calloway, which was Elena recognized not an accident. Henry Calloway had questions, and Caleb needed to be the one answering them. "Mrs. Hartwell," Addie said. She said the name carefully, like someone handling something they're not certain is genuine, but have chosen to treat as if it is. "Addie," Elena said. "You look well tonight." "I don't feel particularly well," Addie said. And then with the directness of someone who has decided they are done being indirect. "Beatrice Morrison told my father something this afternoon, before we came tonight." Elena went still. "She told him," Addie said, keeping her voice very low, "that she had heard from one of the household staff. She said that your marriage to Mr. Hartwell was not a marriage at all, that you came here as a seamstress and were pressed into the role the night of the party." She looked at Elena with the steady eyes of a young woman who has been watching adults manage her life for years and has developed very precise instruments for reading them. "She said you were being paid." The room continued around them, the music, the laughter, the clink of glasses. Elena felt the full weight of it. "What did your father say?" she said. "He didn't say anything," Addie said. "He smiled. The way he smiles when something has handed him something useful." She paused. "I don't like that smile." "No," Elena said. "I wouldn't either." Addie held her gaze. "Is it true?" Elena looked at her for a long moment. This was the question. Not Fairfax's question. His was already weaponized. This was a 20-year-old woman asking her directly, with the particular courage of someone who has been moved around like a piece on other people's boards, and is asking quietly to be treated like a person instead. "It started as an arrangement," Elena said. "It's not entirely that anymore." Addie absorbed this. "That's a very careful answer. It's the most honest one I can give you right now," Elena said. "Some things are still working themselves out." Addie looked across the room to where her father stood. The smile Addie had described was indeed on his face, and it was directed at Sutton, who had appeared at his elbow and was speaking quietly and quickly. "He's going to use it," Addie said. "Whatever Beatrice told him, he's going to use it tonight." "I know," Elena said. "What will you do?" Elena watched Fairfax across the room. She watched Sutton's mouth moving. She watched Caleb with Henry Calloway, who was nodding slowly, the nod of a man whose understanding is solidifying into something. "What I always do," Elena said. "The work that's in front of me." She found Caleb in 3 minutes. She stepped to his side in the smooth way of a wife naturally rejoining her husband, and she put her hand on his arm and leaned in close enough that what she said would reach him and not the men around him. "Beatrice told Fairfax," she said, "about the arrangement, that I'm paid. He knows." She felt his arm tighten under her hand. One beat. Then he continued his conversation with Henry Calloway without a single visible seam in it, which was either remarkable self-control or the muscle memory of a man who has been performing composure so long it has become structural. "Henry," Caleb said, "I'd like you to meet my wife." Elena's been following the water rights question closely. She was actually the one who noticed the clause in the first place. Henry Calloway looked at her with the frank appraisal of a man who doesn't have the patience for pleasantries and respects people who don't waste his time. Your wife found the clause. She was in the meeting, Caleb said. She heard Holt explain the survey timeline, and she asked immediately how we get the land office logs that afternoon. Calloway looked at her. You know about title disputes. I know about anything I can read, Elena said. The clause isn't subtle once you know to look at it. The 90-day window against an 18-month resolution timeline, that's not a mistake. That's arithmetic. Calloway made a sound low in his chest. My eastern pasture access runs through the same valley water system. I know, Elena said. That's why it matters that you understand what you're looking at before anyone asks you to sign anything tonight. Calloway looked at Caleb. Your wife, he said again in the tone of a man completing a thought. My wife, Caleb said. Fairfax moved toward them across the room. Elena felt it before she saw it, the shift in the room's current, the way people stepped slightly aside for a man who expects to be moved around the focused direction of his approach. He arrived with his warmth assembled, and his smile deployed, and his eyes doing the thing they did running the current underneath. Caleb. He looked at Elena. Mrs. Hartwell. The title delivered with a micro-pause, a blade thin enough that only someone looking for it would feel it. I was hoping we'd all have a moment. Henry and I were just finishing up, Caleb said. Of course. Fairfax positioned himself so that his body was angled toward Elena in the way of someone who has decided she is the point. I've been hearing some interesting things this evening. Have you? Caleb said. About your marriage. Fairfax's smile remained exactly in place. The somewhat sudden nature of it. The circumstances of your first meeting. He looked at Elena with a warmth that was no longer pretending. I imagine it's been quite an adjustment, going from one kind of work to all of this. The room around them had developed the particular listening quality of people not looking. Elena felt the moment the way she had felt the storm coming down from the mountains Friday afternoon, the pressure of it, the direction of it, the knowledge that it was going to hit regardless of what she did. She looked at Victor Fairfax. I imagine, she said clearly, that a man who accessed Territorial Land Office records 14 months ago specifically to identify a survey timeline he could build a fraudulent default clause around has spent a great deal of this evening hoping no one would be talking about that instead. The silence that fell was immediate and complete. Fairfax's smile stayed on his face for 2 full seconds before his eyes caught up to it. I beg your pardon. Gerald Holt filed a records request this week, Elena said. She kept her voice level and her volume exactly sufficient to be heard by the people immediately around them, which was now a considerable number of people. Thomas Greer at the Territorial Land Office confirmed that a man named Sutton, your legal counsel I believe visited 14 months ago, and pulled the full survey file on the Hartwell Northern Range, including the associated resolution timeline documentation. She paused. A month later, you began approaching Caleb's family about a partnership. 3 months after his father's death, you proposed a debt instrument with a 90-day default clause structured to expire before any realistic survey resolution could be achieved. And attached to that default is a water right seizure affecting every rancher in the Eastern Valley. Fairfax had gone very still. Henry Calloway had not gone still. Henry Calloway had turned to face Fairfax with the expression of a man who has just understood something fully. Victor, Henry said. His voice was quiet and not pleasant. My eastern pasture access. This is... Fairfax started. He recovered fast. She gave him that he had spent years in rooms where the narrative could be redirected. This is a mischaracterization of a standard. It's documented, Caleb said. He said it without heat, the cold, precise voice he used when he had decided something. Holt's affidavit is ready to file with the Territorial Court Monday morning. You're welcome to have Sutton review it tonight if you'd like his opinion on its strength. Sutton, who had appeared at the edge of the group, looked at the document. Henry Calloway was now holding. Adelaide had materialized from somewhere and placed it there with the timing of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment. And Sutton's face did the thing faces do when a man who is paid to assess risk has just assessed some and found it unacceptable. Fairfax looked at Elena. It was not a warm look. The performance was fully gone now, and what was underneath it was the face of a man who has been precise and patient and clever for a very long time and is looking at the person who undid it and is calculating. "You," he said. Just the one word. "Me," Elena said. "You're a seamstress." He said it the way it had been said to her before, by Beatrice in the sewing room, by Thornton in the parlor, as diminishment as erasure. The reminder of what she was supposed to be. "You came here to mend dresses." "I did," Elena said. "And then I listened to a meeting through a wall and read some documents and asked a lawyer a few questions and paid attention to the way arithmetic works." She held his gaze. "I'm very good at paying attention." Fairfax looked at Caleb. Whatever he saw in Caleb's face, the stillness of it, the absolute absence of uncertainty, told him something he didn't want to know. He straightened. He smoothed the front of his coat. He produced from somewhere a final reduced version of the smile. "This conversation," he said, "would be better had privately." "I disagree," Caleb said. The people around them were no longer pretending not to listen. Henry Calloway had his arm crossed and was watching Fairfax with the frank displeasure of a man who has nearly been robbed and knows it. Two other ranchers Elena recognized from the morning ride had moved closer. Adelaide stood to the left with her hands folded and her expression serene, the expression of a woman who has placed every piece exactly where she intended. Fairfax looked around the circle. He made his calculation. "I'll be in touch with my counsel," he said. He walked away. Sutton followed. And the room, the 200 people who had been attending the Henderson dance and had gotten something considerably more interesting, exhaled all at once, and the music started again, and Calloway clapped Caleb on the shoulder and said something Elena didn't catch, because the blood in her ears was loud, and her hands, held steady all this time, were now shaking slightly. Caleb's hand found her elbow, not the public gesture. The real one, fingers curved around her arm with the specific pressure of someone steadying another person because they need steadying. "You're all right," he said. Quiet, just to her. "I know," she said. Her voice was even. Her hands were still shaking. "Elena." "I said I know." She looked at him. "I'm fine. Just give me a moment." He gave her the moment. He stood beside her and let the room move around them, and did not remove his hand from her elbow, and she was grateful for this without knowing how to say so. Addie Fairfax was standing near the wall watching her father's retreating back with an expression Elena couldn't fully read from across the room, something complicated, something that had age in it beyond her years. Elena caught her eye. Addie looked back at her, and after a moment she nodded. A small, deliberate thing. Elena nodded back. She found Beatrice 20 minutes later. She wasn't looking for her, or she told herself she wasn't. But Beatrice was standing near the door to the side hall with a glass she wasn't drinking from, and an expression that had been stripped of its usual architecture. They looked at each other. "You told him," Elena said. "Yes," Beatrice said. "Why?" Beatrice held her gaze. "I've known Caleb Hartwell since we were children. I told you that. I've watched him close himself off year after year since Charlotte." She paused. "I thought when you arrived, when I saw what you were, I thought if I gave Fairfax the ammunition, it would end the arrangement, and he'd—" She stopped. "And he'd be alone again," Elena said, "which felt safer to you than whatever this is." Beatrice looked at her with something that was too honest for the evening. The look of a woman who has just heard her own motive named accurately and is too tired to deny it. "Yes," she said. "But you also warned me about Fairfax," Elena said. 3 days ago." "I know. Which was it, Beatrice warning me, or arming him?" Beatrice pressed her lips together. "Both," she said. "I made 2 different decisions at 2 different moments, and they contradicted each other." She looked across the room to where Caleb was standing with Henry Calloway and 2 other ranchers, talking with the ease of a man whose position has just solidified rather than collapsed. "He looks different," she said. "Does he?" "He looks—" Beatrice paused. "Less defended, even standing there in a room full of people." She turned back to Elena. That's you. Elena said nothing. I'm not apologizing, Beatrice said. I did what I did. I'm just... She stopped again. Telling you I see it. All right, Elena said. She walked back toward the dance floor. Caleb found her on the edge of it. The music had shifted to something slower, the kind of song that requires decision, whether to dance or to stand and talk and pretend you're making a different kind of decision. Dance with me, he said. Not a performance command. Not a practical calculation. He said it the way you say something when you mean only that thing and nothing behind it. Elena stepped forward. He put his arm around her, and she put her hand in his, and they moved into the music, and this was different from Thursday's practice, different from the sitting room, and the lamp going out, and the 6 seconds in the dark. This was 200 people, and all the lights up, and everything visible, and he was holding her like a man who has decided to stop measuring the distance. You were extraordinary tonight, he said. I did what needed doing. Elena. The particular weight he put in her name, the real weight, the after-hours weight. Accept the thing. She looked up at him. You were extraordinary too, she said. Standing there while Fairfax tried to reduce you and not giving him an inch. I had company, he said. They danced. The room moved around them. She could feel the shift in it the way the people who had watched that confrontation were watching them now, with something that had moved past speculation into something more like recognition. What happens Monday? She said. Holt files. Fairfax's lawyers respond. It goes to territorial court. How long? Months. But the immediate threat is gone. He won't get the signatures tonight or any night soon, and without the signatures, the debt instrument is nothing. He paused. The Northern Range survey still needs to be resolved. Holt knows what to do with that. Yes. He looked at her. You've managed to solve most of my problems in 2 weeks. I had good information, she said, and a lawyer who knew how to use it, and a mother who can move through a room like a woman who loves her son, Elena said. He was quiet for a measure. Your contract, he said. She kept her face neutral. What about it? It was 4 weeks, he said. We're at 2. I'm aware of the timeline. Fairfax is neutralized. The immediate purpose of the arrangement. Caleb. She looked at him steadily. What are you asking? He held her gaze. The room was still there. The 200 people, the music, the lights, and none of it was the sitting room in the dark, and all of it was more exposed, and he was looking at her anyway. I'm asking, he said carefully, what you want. Elena Cross had taken worse positions than this. She had also, she was finding, taken fewer honest ones. And honesty, the real kind, the kind that cost something, was the only thing she'd ever actually been able to rely on. I want to finish what I started, she said. He heard it. She saw him hear it, the way the sentence landed in him, the recognition of his own father's words turned back into something new. His hand tightened at her waist, not a public gesture, not a performance. Just his hand, and just her, and all the things that were still working themselves out, doing their careful, terrifying work. They drove home from the Henderson dance in the kind of quiet that had weight to it. Not the uncomfortable silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the full silence of 2 people carrying something too large for words, and knowing it. Adelaide rode with Mrs. Whitmore in the second carriage. Elena suspected this was deliberate. Adelaide Hartwell did not do things accidentally. Caleb drove. Elena sat beside him with her hands in her lap and watched the dark Wyoming land move past under a sky that had cleared after the storm stars thrown across it in the reckless abundance of a place where there is no city light to diminish them. She had not seen a sky like this in Cheyenne. She had not stopped to look. He didn't speak until they were through the ranch gate. Holt will be at the house early, he said. He wants to go through the filing before Monday. I know, Elena said. You should be there. She turned to look at him. He was watching the road, but his jaw had the set of a man who has said a thing that matters to him and is waiting to see how it lands. All right, she said. He brought the carriage to a stop at the front of the house. He got down and came around and offered his hand to help her. And she took it, and he held it a beat longer than necessary before releasing it. Not the claiming grip from the parlor that first night. Not the dancing hold from Thursday. Not the steadying hand at her elbow after Fairfax. Something that didn't have a category yet. Something that was still becoming what it was. She went upstairs. She changed out of the corrected gown with the care it deserved. She sat on the edge of the bed in the cedar-smelling room that had been a stranger's room 2 weeks ago, and was now simply the room where she slept, and she looked at the wall and thought about what she'd said on the dance floor. I want to finish what I started. She had meant it to sound practical. She was not certain it had. She lay down. She told herself she would think everything through in the morning when the noise of the evening had settled, and the sharp edges had dulled enough to see clearly. She told herself this with the firm intention of a woman who believes she is in charge of her own thinking. She did not sleep for a long time. Down the hall, Caleb Hartwell sat in the chair beside his window and looked at the dark of the North Range and thought about a woman who had walked into his house to mend dresses and had instead mended something he hadn't known was still open. He thought about Charlotte and how different the feeling was, how Charlotte's voice in his memory was smooth and practiced, and how Elena's voice was neither of those things, was rough at the edges and direct at the center, and always, always more honest than he was prepared for. He thought about the land office log and the affidavit, and the way she had stood in front of Victor Fairfax in a room of 200 people and named every piece of the scheme clearly and without drama. Just the facts laid in order like stitches in a seam, and how that had been simultaneously the most frightening and the most solid thing he had seen another person do in years. He thought about, "I want to finish what I started." He thought about his father, who had said those words as a statement of character, and had meant them as a life's instruction. And he thought about what it meant that she had turned them into something else, into an answer to a question he'd barely been brave enough to ask. He went to bed at 2 in the morning, and slept better than he had in 8 months. Sunday arrived with the particular quality of a day after a battle quiet in a way that feels earned, with the light coming clean through the windows and the household moving at half speed. Mrs. Whitmore made a large breakfast that no one had asked for and everyone needed. Adelaide sat at the table in her morning clothes and drank her tea with the serenity of a woman who had accomplished what she set out to accomplish and was now simply existing in the result. Elena came down at 7. Caleb was already there. They looked at each other across the table and said, "Good morning," the way two people say it, when good morning carries more than its usual freight. And then they sat down and ate, and it was Adelaide who kept the conversation moving with the skill of someone who understands that the moments just after something significant need to be held carefully, not pressed. "Henry Calloway sent a message this morning," Adelaide said. "He's asked 3 other ranchers to meet with Holt tomorrow before the filing. They want to be listed as supporting parties." "That's stronger than I expected," Caleb said. "Henry moves fast when he's angry," Adelaide said. "And he was angry." She picked up her tea. "Fairfax will know before Monday morning that the filing is coming with multiple names attached. His counsel will advise him to negotiate rather than litigate." She said this with the certainty of someone who has watched how power moves for 60 years and can read its direction the way a rancher reads weather. "What does he want from the negotiation?" Elena asked. "Retreat," Adelaide said simply. "He wants a path out that doesn't destroy his reputation entirely. A man like Victor Fairfax can survive a failed scheme. He cannot survive being known as the man who tried to steal water rights from half the territory." She looked at Elena. "You gave him that choice last night, publicly, in front of witnesses. That was precisely right." Elena held her gaze. "I wasn't sure it was at the time." "The best things rarely feel certain while you're doing them," Adelaide said. She finished her tea. She stood. She paused at the door with the timing she had always been good at. "Gerald Holt will be here at 9. I've asked Mrs. Whitmore to have the dining room set up for the meeting." She looked at them both. "I'll be there for the first hour. After that, I have correspondence." She left. Elena looked at Caleb. "She's giving us the second hour," he said. "I noticed," Elena said. "She's not subtle." She's very subtle, Elena said. She just doesn't care whether you know she's doing it. Something in his face shifted into the almost smile. She had catalogued over 2 weeks everything that preceded that expression. The slight relaxation of his jaw, the change in the quality of his stillness, and she was aware she had catalogued it and aware of what that meant. Holt arrived at 9 with 2 cases and a focused energy that was the closest Elena had seen him come to excitement. He spread documents across the dining room table and walked them through the filing with the efficiency of a man who has spent the night refining something and is satisfied with the result. The affidavit was clean and precise. The supporting documentation from Thomas Greer's land office records was damning in the quiet way that true things are damning, no drama required, just the facts in their order, each one leading to the next with the inescapable logic of arithmetic. Sutton's visit 14 months ago. The survey timeline, the 90-day clause, the water rights attachment, the gap between what Fairfax had represented the instrument to be and what it actually was. "He'll negotiate," Holt confirmed, echoing Adelaide. "His people will contact us by Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest." He looked at Caleb. "The question is what terms you want." "The Northern Range Survey resolved at his expense," Caleb said. "He has the resources and the connections to accelerate the timeline. If he wants this to end quietly, that's the price." "And the ranchers in the Eastern Valley," Elena said. Both men looked at her. "Calloway and the others, if Fairfax negotiates out of this quietly, they need guarantees too. Formal documentation that their water access is protected and that no version of the debt instrument or anything like it can be brought against them." She looked at Holt. "Can that be structured?" "A territorial easement filing," Holt said slowly. "Yes, it's not simple, but it's doable. Fairfax would hate it." "Good," Elena said. "Make it a condition." Caleb was watching her. Adelaide, from the far end of the table, had the expression of a woman watching something she already knew the shape of arrive on schedule. Holt wrote. He asked questions. He wrote more. Adelaide excused herself at 10 as promised, and Mrs. Whitmore replenished the coffee, and the meeting continued until nearly noon, by which point the filing was complete, and the negotiation strategy was settled, and the Eastern Valley ranchers had more legal protection than they'd had a week ago. Holt packed his cases. He shook Caleb's hand. He shook Elena's hand, which was not something he'd done in any previous meeting, and did it with the deliberate weight of a man making a point. "Monday morning," he said. "I'll send word when it's filed." He left. The house went quiet. Mrs. Whitmore was in the kitchen. Adelaide was in her study. The dining room held just the two of them, and the remains of the morning's work papers squared and stacked, coffee cups gone cold, the particular order of a thing that has been completed. "You asked for the easement," Caleb said. "Someone needed to. It wasn't in our strategy. It should have been." She started gathering the cups. "Those ranchers put their names on Holt's filing. They took a risk. They deserve something real in return, not just the absence of a threat." He was watching her with the look she knew best, now the full one, unmanaged the look he gave her when he'd stopped deciding how much to let show. "Put those down," he said. She looked at the cups in her hands. She set them on the table. "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me say it without interrupting because I'm going to do it badly enough without that." "All right," she said. He stood across the table from her, not close, not far the distance of a man who is choosing his ground carefully. "I told you the arrangement was a transaction," he said. "Clear terms, defined ending. I told myself that was the honest version because everything with a clean structure is honest, and everything without one is dangerous." He stopped, pressed forward. "What I didn't tell you, what I didn't let myself think about, was that I'd spent 8 months in this house alone after my father died running the ranch, and the legal situation, and the Fairfax negotiation, and every other thing, and I had gotten very good at managing all of it, and very bad at existing alongside another person without managing them too." He held her gaze. "And then you walked into that parlor and told a man twice your size to let go, and I spent 2 weeks watching you do things no one asked you to do, and say things no one was ready to hear, and I He stopped again. He stopped. "Caleb," she said, "I'm not finished." "I know, but you're getting there. Keep going." Something in his expression broke open slightly, not painfully the way it breaks when something is being damaged, but the way it breaks when something that has been held too tight is finally allowed to move. "I don't know how to do this without the contract," he said. "I don't know what it looks like when it isn't an arrangement. I don't know." He stopped, started differently. "Charlotte said she loved me for 2 years, and it was a performance from the beginning, and I couldn't tell, and that's the part that has never left me. Not the leaving. The not being able to tell." He looked at her with the full weight of it, the thing he had been carrying since she'd seen the first flash of it when she asked him about his marriage that first night in the study. "I can't always tell what's real." Elena stood across the table and looked at him and felt the full, precise shape of what it cost him to say that. "I know," she said. "I know you can't." "Elena, I'm not finished either." She held his gaze. "I came here for money. That was real. Margaret's school fees are real. The doctor in Denver is real. I didn't come here for you, and I wasn't expecting you, and the first night I told myself this was a transaction, and I would keep it that way because transactions are safe, and I am a very practical woman." She paused. "And then I spent 2 weeks in your house, and I sat across from your lawyer, and I rode next to you in the North Range, and I stood in a dark room while a storm hit, and none of it felt like a transaction. Any of it." She stopped, steadied. "I can't prove to you that what I feel is real. You'll have to decide that for yourself. But I can tell you that I have never in my life said a thing I didn't mean, and I'm not going to start now. And what I mean is that I don't want to leave when the 4 weeks are up." The dining room was very quiet. "I don't want you to leave," he said. It came out simple. The simplest thing he had said to her. "Then ask me to stay," she said. He came around the table. Not fast. He wasn't a fast man. He was a man who moved with deliberate care, and always had been. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at her the way he looked at her on the dance floor, with nothing managed, nothing calibrated, just him looking at her. "Stay," he said. "Yes," she said. He kissed her. Not 6 seconds this time. Not the brief, frightened thing from the dark sitting room, the one he'd pulled back from with. "We agreed no feelings." This was the one after that. The one that knew what it was. The one that had thought about it and decided and arrived. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, and they both breathed, and neither of them said anything, because the moment didn't require words, and they were both smart enough to know it. Then the kitchen door opened down the hall, and Mrs. Whitmore's footsteps crossed toward them, and they separated, and Elena picked up the coffee cups she'd put down, and Caleb straightened a stack of papers, and when Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, they were on opposite sides of the table, looking like two people who had just finished a meeting. Mrs. Whitmore looked at them. She had worked in this household for 20 years. "Lunch is ready," she said, with the tone of a woman who has decided to know exactly as much as she chooses to know. The week that followed had a different texture than the two before it. Holt filed Monday morning. By Tuesday noon, Fairfax's legal team had contacted him. Not Sutton, a different lawyer, which meant Sutton had been moved aside, which meant Fairfax was serious about the negotiation and was bringing different tools. By Wednesday, the outline of a settlement was taking shape. The Northern Range Survey, to be funded and expedited by Fairfax's resources, the territorial easement protecting Eastern Valley water access, to be filed simultaneously, and a formal withdrawal of the debt instrument. No admission of fraudulent intent. Caleb's lawyer had advised him not to push for that. You get what matters, and you leave the man a face-saving story, because a man with nothing to lose fights harder than one with a way out. "Do you agree with that?" Elena asked Holt when he explained it. "Strategically, yes," Holt said. "Morally, it costs something." "Most strategic decisions do," she said. Caleb initialed the settlement outline Wednesday afternoon. Holt would have the formal documents by Friday. The Eastern Valley ranchers were notified Thursday morning, and Henry Calloway sent a bottle of whiskey to the ranch with a note that said in its entirety, "Good work." H.C. Caleb put it on the shelf in the study without drinking it. For when the survey is actually cleared, he said. That could be months, Elena said. I know. He looked at the bottle. My father would have done the same thing. She understood. She let it stand. On Thursday evening, a letter arrived from Cheyenne, from Margaret. Elena read it at the writing desk in her room, and she sat with it for a long time after, not because anything in it was bad, but because everything in it was good, in a way that made her chest ache with the particular ache of things resolving. Margaret had received the bank draft Elena had sent it the previous week, the first payment from Caleb's doubled rate. She had met with the admissions office at the Denver Teachers College. She had spoken with the doctor. She wrote all of this in the slightly formal prose of a 19-year-old who has been taught to be careful with emotion and is trying to be something else and not quite getting there. And then at the end of the letter she had written, "Are you happy there, Ellie? Your letters sound different. I can't say how exactly, just different." Elena folded the letter. She sat with "Are you happy there?" and thought about what she would write back. She was still thinking about it when she went downstairs and found Caleb in the study, not at the desk, standing by the window, with a letter of his own, reading it with the still focus of a man processing something significant. "What is it?" she said. He handed it to her. It was from the Territorial Land Office, not Thomas Greer. The office itself, a formal notice. The survey dispute on the Northern Range had been flagged for expedited review, initiating the accelerated process Fairfax's settlement had set in motion. "It's starting," he said. "Faster than I expected," Elena said. "Holt applied pressure in the right places." He paused. "You suggested the easement as a condition. Holt said it was that condition more than anything else that made Fairfax settle quickly, because the easement would make the scheme permanent public record in a way a simple withdrawal wouldn't." "It needed to be permanent," she said. "Otherwise someone else tries the same thing in 10 years. He looked at her with the expression she had named in her own private accounting as the real one. "My father tried to get this survey resolved for 3 years, he said. He filed twice. Both times the paperwork stalled in the territorial office. He died thinking it was going to drag on indefinitely." He looked at the letter. "If we get this cleared—" "You will," she said. "You can't know that." "No," she said. "But I know you'll finish it. That's enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's the second time you've used his words." "They were good words," she said. "They deserve to keep being used." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing the thing she had learned to read, not the controlled, managed version, but the actual thing moving underneath the thing he was still learning to let show. "I wrote to Margaret," he said. She stared. "You what?" "I wrote to your sister, this morning, before the Holt meeting." He said it with the slight caution of a man who has done something he believes was right and is still not certain how it will be received. "I introduced myself. I told her the school fees and the doctor's costs through the end of the year were handled, and that she should write to Mrs. Whitmore if she needed anything forwarded to you." He paused. "And I told her that you were the most capable and honest person I had encountered in a very long time, and that she should be proud of her sister." Elena stood with this. "Caleb?" "Too much," he said. "No," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "Not too much." "She wrote back already. It came with your letter." He held out a separate folded sheet. "She's fast." Elena opened it. Margaret's handwriting was quicker than her own, slightly impatient, the hand of a girl who thinks faster than she can write. It said, "I like him. Don't let him go." Elena looked at the paper in her hands. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. She looked up. "She says I should keep you." "I heard," he said. "She has good judgment." "Clearly," he said. "She's your sister." Elena set the letter down and looked at him and felt the full weight of 2 weeks, the parlor and the study and the contract and the rules and the dark sitting room and the 6 seconds and the dance floor and stay, and yes, felt all of it settle into something that was not the shape of an arrangement, and never had been, even when they'd both been telling themselves it was. "I need to go to Cheyenne," she said, "to get the rest of my things." His expression shifted. A flicker fast and controlled, but she saw it. "How many things?" he said. "Not many," she said. "I don't own much." She held his gaze. "But I'd like to come back with them." He understood what she was saying, what she was really saying. She watched him understand it, the unlocking of it, the thing that had been tensed since Wednesday's stay, and yes, waiting for the other shoe. "I'll have the East Wing room properly furnished," he said. "That's not the room I meant," she said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. "No," he said. "I didn't think it was." Adelaide appeared in the study doorway at the precise moment a person appears who has been listening for the right silence to enter on. She looked at both of them with the perfectly calibrated expression of a woman who knows and has always known and has been patient about it. "Mrs. Whitmore is asking about dinner," she said. "We'll be there in a moment," Caleb said. Adelaide looked at Elena. Something warm and sure moved through her eyes. "Margaret," she said. "That's a lovely name." She left before Elena could ask how she knew it. "Does she read correspondence that isn't hers?" Elena said. "Only when she thinks it matters," Caleb said. "Does it bother you?" "Less than it used to." He moved to the door. He paused. "I used to think the most dangerous thing in this house was my mother knowing everything." He looked at her. "I've updated my view." Elena followed him into the hall. "What's the most dangerous thing now? You?" he said simply. "Reading rooms, paying attention, knowing what things cost." He started toward the dining room. "You walked in here 2 weeks ago and saw every crack before anyone showed them to you. That's—" He paused. "That's not a safe person to have in your life." "No," she said, walking beside him. "It isn't." She looked at him. "Do you want a safe person?" He considered this for the length of the corridor. "No," he said. "I want you." She let that land. She did not deflect it. She let it be what it was. The simplest, honest thing said by a man who had spent years in the careful architecture of safe arrangements, walking away from the last one he'd tried to build. They went into dinner. The dining room had its familiar evening arrangement. The good lamp, the 4 places, Mrs. Whitmore having made something that smelled of rosemary and long preparation. Adelaide was already seated. She had the look of a woman at the head of a table that contains everything she cares about, which Elena was still learning to sit with the particular weight of being cared about by Adelaide Hartwell, which was not a small or gentle thing. They ate. They talked. Adelaide asked about the Calloway response to the settlement, and Caleb told her, and then Adelaide told a story about Henry Calloway's father and a land dispute from 30 years ago that had ended badly for everyone, and left a lesson that apparently Henry had retained better than his father had. Mrs. Whitmore brought more bread. Caleb refilled Elena's water without asking, the way you do for someone whose glass you've learned to watch. Elena caught Adelaide's eye across the table. Adelaide lifted her own glass very slightly. A private acknowledgement. The kind you give to someone who has arrived. After dinner, Elena wrote to Margaret. She sat at the desk in the East Wing room for the last time she was aware. The last time it would be the room she slept in, and she wrote with the honesty she owed her sister, which was the same honesty she owed herself. She wrote, "He's not what I expected. He's better and harder than that. The ranch is real, and the work is real, and what I feel about him is the realest thing I've had in a long time. I don't know yet exactly what shape it takes, but I know I'm not leaving." She stopped. She wrote, "I'm happy here, Maggie. I can't say exactly how. Just different." She sealed the letter. She looked at the cedar-smelling room, the bureau, the window, the bed she had lain in that first night in her gray wool dress, telling herself she was going to be fine. She had been fine. She thought, considerably more than fine now, and it had happened the way the most real things happen, not all at once, not with announcement, but incrementally, one honest moment layered on the next until the accumulation became undeniable. Down the hall, Caleb Hartwell was sitting in the chair by his window. He was not reading, and he was not working. He was simply sitting in the dark of the house his father had built, listening to it settle around him the way it settled every night, the timber, the far horses, the Wyoming wind, and tonight it felt different than it had for 8 months. Not quieter, the same sounds. But there was a person on the other side of the wall, and he knew it, and the knowing changed the quality of everything. He was not afraid of it. That was the thing. He had expected to be afraid, had been afraid for 2 weeks, had managed the fear with transactions and contracts and defined terms, the way he managed everything that threatened to cost him more than he'd agreed to pay. And somewhere between the dark sitting room and the dance floor and the dining room table, this morning the fear had changed into something that still had edges, but was not at its center fear anymore. He picked up his father's letter, the last one James Hartwell had written to him before the illness had made writing impossible, which Caleb kept in the desk drawer and had not read in 4 months, because he had needed to wait until he could read it without the grief being the only thing. He read it now. His father had written, among other things, "The ranch will be fine. The land is solid, and you are solid, and those 2 things together are enough. What I want for you is not security, Caleb. Any man with work and will can build security. What I want is the thing I had with your mother, someone who tells you the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient and stays anyway. That's the rare thing. Don't manage your way around it when it arrives." Caleb sat with that for a long time. Then he folded the letter and put it back and turned off the lamp and went to bed. And for the first time since his father died, the house felt like a home he was building forward rather than a thing he was holding together. In the morning, Elena came down to breakfast in the pale blue cotton dress her own, the plain one not Adelaide's loan. And Caleb was at the table, and he looked up when she came in, and he looked at her, the way he'd been looking at her for days now, with the unmanaged full weight of it, the real look. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She sat. Mrs. Whitmore brought coffee. The ranch moved around them, the sounds of the morning. The distant work, the ordinary machinery of a household that runs because people know their jobs and do them. "I'll need a week to get my things from Cheyenne," Elena said. "Maybe 10 days. "Take what you need," Caleb said. "Margaret wants to come see the ranch when she can get away from the college." She looked at him. "Is that—" "Yes," he said before she finished. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. "The Northern Range Survey," she said. "Holt says 8 weeks now with Fairfax's funding in place. Maybe 6. "When it's cleared," she said, "you should put a marker on it, something your father would have put there." He looked at her across the table. "What kind of marker?" "I don't know. Something that says the land is settled and the dispute is done, and the name on it means what it's always meant." She met his eyes. Something he'd have wanted to see. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He wanted to build a second structure on the North Range, a smaller house for the ranch hands working that section. He drew up plans. Never got to build it. "Then build it," Elena said. "That'll take more than 6 weeks." "I know," she said, "but you'll finish it." He looked at her. "That's what you do," she said. He held her gaze with the full weight of it, the man beneath the management. The person she'd been reading since the night she'd walked into his house to mend dresses, and had ended up mending something neither of them had known needed it. Beatrice Morrison sent a note that arrived with the Morning Post. Formal brief. It said she understood the Fairfax settlement had been reached, and she was glad the ranch was protected, and she hoped things were going well. At the bottom, in slightly smaller writing, "I was wrong about several things. I expect you already know which ones." Elena showed it to Caleb. He read it. He set it down. "What should I do with it?" he said. "Nothing for now," she said. "Let it be what it is. A person admitting they were wrong is worth something, even if it doesn't require an answer yet." He nodded. He understood the patience of it. Adelaide came to breakfast late, which was unusual, and sat with the careful posture of a woman who has made a decision and is settling into it. She looked at Elena, and she looked at Caleb, and she looked at the table between them, the coffee, the letters, the ordinary morning spread of a household that has figured out how to be itself. And she said nothing because she didn't need to. She had said what she needed to say over the past 2 weeks in every room and every moment, and it had been heard. Some things don't require a final statement. They require only that you look at them clearly and confirm they are real. A fake marriage hadn't created love at Hartwell Ranch in the autumn of that Wyoming year. It had only revealed what was already there waiting in a man who had stopped trusting, and a woman who had never stopped paying attention, and the particular grace of two people honest enough to let a lie become the truest thing either of them had ever lived. Elena Cross had come to mend what was broken. She had stayed because she was already home.